My water broke in the hospital waiting room exactly 5 minutes after the doctor told me my husband was dead. I called my mother begging for help, only to hear her complain that my crying was ruining her first-class flight to Hawaii with my brother. 5 years later, they showed up at my door demanding I sell my home to pay off their secret debt. They had no idea they were threatening a senior forensic accountant. Before I tell you how I made my sister-in-law cry real tears in front of the FBI, while my brother begged on his knees, let me know where you are watching from, in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to survive. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old, and this is how I dismantled the people who were supposed to love me. The frantic pounding on my front door started at exactly 7 in the morning on a Saturday. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, aggressive thud of someone who believed they owned the place. I tightened the belt of my robe, checked the security camera on my phone, and felt my blood run cold. It was my older brother Malik and his wife Chloe. I had not spoken to them in over 6 months. I opened the door just a crack, intending to ask what they wanted, but Malik pushed his weight against the wood, forcing his way into my entryway. Chloe followed right behind him, carrying an iced coffee and wearing muddy designer boots. She did not even pause to wipe her feet before stepping directly onto my pristine cream-colored rug. I had spent months curating this space to be a safe, peaceful haven for me and my 5-year-old daughter, Aaliyah. Now the heavy scent of Chloe's expensive perfume and Malik's nervous sweat contaminated the air. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I would not wake Aaliyah down the hall. Malik paced across the living room, agitated and breathless. "We need you to co-sign a loan," he said, not even bothering to say hello. "Mom and Dad are going to lose the house. The bank is foreclosing next week. I need $150,000 by Friday." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer audacity of his demand. Malik was the golden child. He was the son who could do no wrong, the brilliant entrepreneur who was always one deal away from becoming a millionaire. My parents had funded his lifestyle for a decade, and now he was standing in my home, demanding my money to fix his mess. "I am not co-signing anything," I said plainly. "That is your problem." Chloe sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if I were a difficult child. She wandered over to my kitchen island, running her finger along the marble countertop. "You know, Maya, you really do not need all this space," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "It is just you and the little girl. Family is everything. You should sell this condo and move into your parents' basement to help out. They need cash, and you are sitting on a gold mine." I looked at the woman who had never worked a hard day in her entire life, telling me to sell the home I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears. Chloe came from old money, but her parents had cut her off when she married Malik. Since then, she had survived by leeching off my parents and playing the role of the devoted, supportive wife on social media. "Move into the basement," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "You want me to sell the home I own so you and my brother can pay off a debt while I raise my daughter underground." "It is called sacrifice," Maya Malik snapped, stepping closer to me. "Mom and Dad have done everything for you. They gave you life. The least you can do is help them when they are about to be thrown out on the street." The hypocrisy was suffocating. I remembered the nights I spent studying for my accounting exams while working 2 jobs because my parents refused to help pay for my college tuition. They needed the money to buy Malik a new luxury car for his graduation. I remembered the cold clinical hospital room where I gave birth completely alone because they refused to cancel a vacation. I took a deep breath, grounding myself. "Get out of my house," I said, pointing toward the door. "You are incredibly selfish," Chloe said, crossing her arms. "This is exactly why your family talks about you the way they do. You only care about yourself. You have all this money from David passing away, and you are just hoarding it while your own blood suffers." Hearing her say my late husband's name sent a surge of pure rage through my veins. David had worked his entire life to ensure Aaliyah and I would be taken care of if anything happened to him. The life insurance was a shield he built for us, and Chloe was talking about it like it was a jackpot I had won. I stepped right up to Chloe, invading her personal space until she instinctively took a step back. "Do not ever speak his name again," I whispered. "And for the record, I know you do not care about my parents losing their house. You just care that they will not be able to pay your credit card bills anymore." Malik grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her toward the door. "You are going to regret this, Maya. I am calling Mom and Dad. We are having a family meeting about this today, and you are going to show up and do the right thing, or you are dead to us." The heavy oak door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames in my hallway. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sharp click of Chloe's heels retreating down the corridor. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a deep primal anger I had spent years trying to bury. Dead to them. The phrase echoed in my mind. If only they knew how peaceful that sounded. I turned the deadbolt, the metallic slide, final and grounding. Down the hall, a small voice called out, "Mommy, is Uncle Malik gone?" I walked into the sunlit bedroom where my 5-year-old daughter Aaliyah sat up in her bed clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Yes, baby," I said, forcing my face to soften into a reassuring smile. "Uncle Malik and Aunt Chloe had to leave early. Get dressed, we are going to church." Church was usually my sanctuary. It was the one place in our community where my parents could not completely control the narrative, or so I thought. I strapped Aaliyah into her car seat and drove across town, my mind calculating the financial implications of Malik's panic. $150,000 by Friday. The bank foreclosing. Malik was reckless, but he was not stupid. He had leveraged something massive to be in this much immediate danger, and he was using my parents as a human shield. I pulled into the crowded parking lot of First Mount Zion. Before I even turned off the engine, I saw them. My mother Brenda and my father Calvin were standing near the sanctuary entrance, perfectly positioned, where the entire congregation could see them. My mother wore a pristine white suit and an oversized hat, the picture of a devoted God-fearing matriarch. Beside her, my father leaned heavily on a polished wooden cane he only brought out when he wanted sympathy. They were waiting for me. I unbuckled Aaliyah, holding her hand tightly as we walked across the asphalt. The moment my mother spotted us, her face transformed into a mask of pure, ecstatic joy. "Maya, my sweet girl." She called out, her voice loud enough to turn the heads of the deacons greeting people at the doors. "Come give your mother a hug." She pulled me into an embrace that looked warm to the onlookers, but her manicured fingers dug painfully into my upper arm. Through her perfect white-toothed smile, she whispered directly into my ear, "You are going to embarrass us today, Maya. You will bring your daughter inside smile for the pastor, and then you are coming to Sunday dinner at our house. If you run away from this, I swear to God, I will tell the entire congregation that you are abandoning your dying father." I pulled back, looking at her cold, unblinking eyes. Her breath smelled of peppermint and malice. I glanced at my father. He gave a weak, dramatic cough into his handkerchief, nodding at a passing church elder, before shooting me a look of pure steel. "We need to talk about the house, Maya," he said quietly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Do not make a scene. Malik told us what you said to Chloe. You owe her an apology, and you owe this family your respect." I looked from the woman who had abandoned me in a hospital to the man who enabled her cruelty my entire life. They wanted a performance. I would give them one. I smiled brightly, patting my mother's arm. "Of course, Mom," I said, raising my voice just enough for the nearest churchgoers to hear. "I would never miss Sunday dinner. I will see you at 2 o'clock." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious of my sudden compliance, but she let go of my arm. "Good," she said smoothly. "Do not be late. We are serving prime rib." I walked Aaliyah to the children's ministry, my mind working at the speed of light. They thought they were luring a terrified, guilty daughter into a trap. They did not realize they had just invited a forensic auditor to a crime scene. I sat through the sermon without hearing a single word of the pastor's message. Instead, I mentally cataloged everything I knew about Malik's business structure and my parents' mortgage history. By the time the final hymn played, my tears were completely dried up. At exactly 2 o'clock, I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' colonial-style home. It was the same house I had grown up in, the house where my bedroom had been the smallest while Malik enjoyed the master suite upstairs. The driveway was packed with the luxury vehicles of my extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins had all been summoned. My mother always required an audience when she planned an execution. I had dropped Aaliyah off with my trusted friend Sarah on the way over, refusing to let my daughter breathe the toxic air of this family gathering. I walked through the front door alone. The smell of roasted meat and heavy spices filled the foyer. The living room was loud with laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. But the moment I stepped into the room, the noise died down entirely. Chloe was sitting on the expensive leather sofa, nursing a glass of wine, her eyes red and puffy, as if she had been crying for hours. Malik stood behind her, a protective hand on her shoulder, glaring at me. My Aunt Viv, my mother's younger sister and chief gossip, immediately crossed her arms tightly. "Well, look who finally decided to show up to help her family." Aunt Viv sneered, looking me up and down. "Where is Aaliyah? Did you not want her to see her grandfather in his final days?" I kept my face completely neutral. I set my purse on the console table and walked directly into the center of the room. "Aaliyah is having a play date," I said evenly. "Let us get right down to business." My father shifted in his oversized leather armchair, releasing a long, exaggerated sigh, meant to draw everyone's attention. He patted the empty space on the sofa next to him. "Sit down, Maya," he said, his voice trembling just enough to sell the performance to the rest of the room. "We do not need to fight today. We just need to survive this tragedy together as a family." My mother stepped forward from the kitchen, holding a thick manila envelope. She pulled out a stack of heavily stapled documents and laid them onto the glass coffee table. The prominent logo of a well-known predatory commercial lending firm was stamped across the top page. "It is just a simple guarantor agreement," she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal honey. $150,000. It will cover your father's experimental heart surgery. Insurance will not touch the procedure, and Malik has all his capital tied up in his new real estate development projects. We need you to step up and be the daughter we raised you to be." I did not look at the papers. I looked at my brother. Malik stood near the stone fireplace, trying his best to look appropriately solemn and burdened. But my trained eyes caught the heavy, unmistakable gleam of solid gold slipping out from under his tailored jacket sleeve. I walked slowly toward him, closing the distance until I was standing just inches away. "An experimental heart surgery," I repeated, keeping my tone deadly flat. "That is a fascinating medical emergency. Tell me, Dad, does this world-renowned cardiologist accept payment in 18-karat gold?" The entire living room went dead silent. Malik quickly yanked his arm back, pulling his sleeve down to his wrist, but he was far too late. "That is a brand new Rolex day date," I said, turning my back to him to face the rest of the family. "The retail price for that specific model is roughly $40,000. And Mom," I pointed directly toward the entryway console, where her purse sat proudly on display. "That is a Hermes Birkin in Togo leather with gold hardware. You just bought that last month from a luxury boutique in New York." Let us not forget about Chloe. I shifted my cold gaze to my sister-in-law, who immediately crossed her arms over her chest to hide her wrists. "I see 2 Cartier love bracelets and a brand new diamond tennis necklace." Aunt Viv shifted uncomfortably on the love seat, nervously adjusting her silk collar. "Maya, it is extremely rude and completely inappropriate to count other people's money," she muttered, looking away from my piercing stare. "It is completely appropriate when those exact same people are actively trying to steal mine," I snapped back, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "If Dad is dying, sell the luxury watch. Sell the designer bag. Sell the diamonds. You have at least $80,000 in high-end accessories sitting right here in this room, so do not stand there and tell me to mortgage my home and drain my bank accounts to save his life." Malik finally snapped. He slammed his fist against the wooden mantel, causing a family portrait to rattle against the brick. "That is not liquid cash, Maya," he yelled, dropping the grieving son act entirely. "I need liquid cash right now to save the business. The development project stalled because of major zoning issues. The private lenders are calling in the note. If I do not pay them by Friday morning, they are seizing all the commercial properties, and they are taking Mom and Dad's house, because they put it up as collateral for my business loan. I looked at my parents. They did not look ashamed of their massive lie. They only looked annoyed that I was smart enough to figure it out so quickly. "So Dad is not dying," I said, letting the pathetic reality sink into the stale air of the room. "You just lied to the entire extended family to guilt-trip me into bailing out Malik's failed business venture. He is your older brother." My mother shrieked, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. "You have a duty to help him. David left you nearly $1 million in life insurance plus Aaliyah's massive college fund. You are going to sign those loan papers, or you are going to write a cashier's check today." I looked her dead in the eye, feeling an icy calm wash over my entire body. "I am not giving you a single dime." Chloe stepped forward from the corner, a nasty, triumphant smirk spreading across her pale face. "We thought you might be difficult about this," she said, reaching into her expensive designer tote bag. She pulled out a different set of legal documents and tossed them onto the coffee table right next to the commercial loan agreement. "If you do not help us, Calvin and Brenda are filing for grandparents' rights, and Malik and I will be filing for emergency custody of Aaliyah." My breath hitched in my throat, but I forced my facial muscles to remain completely still. "Custody?" I asked softly. "Yes," my father said, leaning forward, the weak old man persona completely vanishing from his rigid posture. "You have been incredibly unstable since David died. You work intensely long hours at your corporate firm. You selfishly isolate Aaliyah from her loving extended family. Chloe's father is a highly respected family court judge in this exact county. He has already reviewed the initial draft of our petition. We will tell the court you are an unfit, mentally disturbed widow, and we will take that little girl from you permanently. Sign the loan, Maya. Buy your peace and keep your daughter." The sheer evil of their plan hung in the room like toxic smoke. They were willing to rip my child away from her only living parent just to fund Malik's bruised ego. I looked at each of their faces. My mother's desperate glare. My father's cold calculation. Chloe's arrogant smirk. Malik's pathetic entitlement. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up my purse from the console table. "Do what you have to do," I said quietly, "but remember this exact moment. Remember that you chose this war." I walked out the front door and walked down the long driveway to my car. As soon as I was safely inside the vehicle, I locked the doors. They thought they had backed a helpless widow into a corner with their legal threats. They did not realize they had just handed a ruthless forensic accountant the exact motivation she needed to completely destroy their financial lives. I pulled out my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the private number of my firm's billionaire managing partner. The trap was set. It was time to go to war. The phone rang twice before a deep and gravelly voice answered. "Maya, you do not usually call me on a Sunday," Richard Sterling said. Richard was the managing partner of my wealth management firm, a man who built a billionaire empire from absolutely nothing. He knew my work ethic, and he treated me more like a daughter than an employee. "I need a massive favor, Richard," I said, staring at my parents' house through the rearview mirror. "I need the firm to purchase a commercial debt portfolio through a blind shell company by tomorrow morning. And I need to be the sole managing director of that LLC." Richard paused, the silence heavy on the line. "Is this about the brother?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "He crossed a line today. He threatened to take my daughter." There was a low, dark chuckle on the other end of the line. "Send me the details," Richard said smoothly. "We will buy the paper by tomorrow afternoon. Burn them to the ground, Maya." I drove home with a mind perfectly clear and hyper-focused. The moment I walked through my front door, I paid the babysitter, kissed Aaliyah goodnight, and went straight into my home office. I locked the door, booted up my triple monitor setup, and cracked my knuckles. My family thought they were dealing with a grieving, emotional widow. They forgot they were dealing with a senior forensic accountant who spent her entire career dismantling corporate frauds. It was time to do what I did best. Follow the money. Malik was careless. He liked the appearance of wealth much more than the actual labor of maintaining it. I pulled up public tax records, property deeds, and corporate filings for his real estate development company. He had taken out a high-interest mezzanine loan from a predatory commercial lender 2 years ago, using my parents' fully paid-off house as collateral. That much was obvious. But as an auditor, I never stop at the obvious layer. I dig until I hit the bedrock. I needed to know exactly how Malik funded his initial startup capital 5 years ago. He was broke back then. My parents were comfortable, but they did not have $250,000 in liquid cash to just hand him. I accessed the state business registry and pulled the original incorporation documents for his company. The date of incorporation was exactly 5 days after my husband David died. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I opened another secure portal, one that gave me access to deep banking routing histories. I traced the routing numbers on Malik's initial business deposits. The money had transferred from a local credit union. It was the exact same credit union where David had set up a custodial trust account for Aaliyah right before he passed away. My hands felt ice cold as I pulled up the archived transfer authorization form. There, sitting blatantly on the bright digital screen, was my own signature. It authorized the immediate withdrawal of $200,000 from Aaliyah's trust, transferring it directly into a joint checking account co-owned by Malik and my mother. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring for just a fraction of a second. The date next to the signature was the exact same day I was in the hospital delivering Aaliyah. The exact same day my mother told me she could not come to the hospital because she was flying to Hawaii with my brother. They did not just abandon me while my husband was in the morgue. They used my medically induced state to bribe a notary and forge my signature, draining my infant daughter's future to fund Malik's vanity project and their luxury vacation. I did not cry. Crying was for victims, and I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. I took screenshots of every document, every IP address, and every timestamp. I downloaded the forged signature and ran it through a digital analysis tool. It was a sloppy, arrogant forgery. My mother's heavy-handed cursive was glaringly obvious in the loops of the letters. I picked up my phone and called a private investigator I kept on retainer for my corporate clients. His name was Vance. I need you to track down a notary public who worked in the county clerk office 5 years ago, I said, reading the notary stamp off the screen. I need to know exactly how much my mother paid him to validate a forged signature, and I need his confession on tape by Wednesday. Consider it done, Vance replied before hanging up. By Monday morning, my counterattack was fully operational. Richard Sterling stayed true to his word. Using a shell corporation named Obsidian Holdings, our firm quietly purchased the entirety of Malik's commercial debt from his panicked private lenders. They were absolutely thrilled to offload the toxic asset at a slight discount. They had no idea they had just handed me the legal deed to my brother's entire life. I was now the owner of his debt. I owned his commercial properties, I owned his company assets, and most importantly, I held the absolute deed of trust to my parents' home. If they did not pay me $1.2 million by Friday morning, I had the legal authority to seize everything and evict them all. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the final transfer documents when my cell phone buzzed. It was an email notification from a local charity foundation. "You are cordially invited to the Women in Business Philanthropy Gala," the subject line read. I clicked on the digital invitation. The event was being hosted by none other than Chloe. She was using her position on the charity board to host a lavish fundraiser on Tuesday night. It was her favorite way to launder her reputation and play the generous, wealthy socialite in front of the local elite. A cold smile crept onto my face as I read the guest list. Chloe had threatened to take my daughter. She had stood in my house and insulted my dead husband. She thought she was untouchable because of her white privilege and her father's position as a judge. She was planning to use this gala to publicly shame me and paint herself as the savior of the family. I clicked the RSVP button, confirming my attendance for a front-row VIP table. Chloe wanted an audience. I was going to give her a show she would never forget. Tuesday night arrived. I hired a private car to take me to the downtown Grand Hotel ballroom. I did not wear the conservative, muted colors my family expected of the grieving widow. I wore a tailored emerald green designer gown that commanded attention. I paired it with diamond drop earrings David had given me on our 5th anniversary. When I stepped out of the car, I was flanked by two of my firm's top corporate litigators, whom Richard had graciously lent me for the evening. We walked into the crowded ballroom just as the opening speeches were beginning. The room was a sea of local politicians, wealthy socialites, and corporate executives. Many were clients of my firm. I spotted Malik standing near the open bar, nursing a scotch, looking stressed, but trying to maintain his charming facade. Chloe was already on the main stage adjusting the microphone stand. She wore a stunning white silk dress, looking every bit the angelic philanthropist. I took my seat at the front VIP table. Chloe had not noticed me yet. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. Chloe cleared her throat, putting on a soft, fragile expression. "Welcome, everyone." She began, her voice perfectly modulated to sound humble and sweet. "Tonight is about giving back to those who have lost their way. As many of you know, my husband and I have always prioritized family and community. Recently, we have been dealing with a heartbreaking situation within our own family." I watched Malik shift uncomfortably by the bar. Chloe paused, letting a single practiced tear slip down her cheek. "My sister-in-law, a widow and single mother, has been struggling deeply with her mental health." Chloe continued, her voice trembling. "My husband's parents are facing severe medical and financial hardships, and sadly, my sister-in-law has turned her back on them in her state of instability. We are stepping in to take custody of her daughter and save my husband's parents from eviction, but the financial burden is immense. That is why your generous donations tonight mean so much to our foundation." A collective murmur of sympathy rippled through the ballroom. Several wealthy women wiped their eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was painting me as a crazy, negligent mother to excuse their custody grab while simultaneously using my parents' fake impending eviction to solicit donations. I did not wait for the applause. I stood up. The emerald dress caught the stage lights, and the room instantly went dead silent as people turned to look at me. I walked calmly up the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The two corporate litigators followed closely behind me, carrying leather briefcases. Chloe saw me approaching, and her face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Malik dropped his glass at the bar. It shattered, but nobody looked his way. Everyone was staring at me. I walked right up the stairs and onto the stage. Chloe instinctively backed away from the microphone. "Thank you for that touching introduction, Chloe," I said, taking the microphone from her trembling hand. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, crisp, clear, and completely unwavering. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Maya. I am the mentally unstable, struggling widow Chloe was just crying about. I am also a senior forensic accountant at Sterling Wealth Management, and I manage the portfolios for at least 20 of the people sitting in this room." Gasps erupted from the VIP tables. A state senator I had played golf with last month raised his eyebrows in shock. Chloe lunged forward, whispering frantically, "Maya, get off this stage right now or I will call security." I ignored her and gestured to the audiovisual technician at the back of the room. "Hit the slides I instructed over the microphone." The massive screen behind Chloe and me flickered to life. Instead of the charity logo, a massive, highly detailed financial pie chart appeared, followed by a list of offshore routing numbers. "Since we are talking about financial burdens and helping the needy, let us take a transparent look at where your generous donations are actually going tonight," I announced, projecting my voice to the back rows. According to the federal tax filings and Cayman Island banking routes I pulled yesterday, exactly 82% of the funds raised by this foundation over the last 2 years have been funneled directly into a private offshore account. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Chloe grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Stop it, you are ruining everything," she hissed. I stepped away from her grip, pointing at the screen. "That account is entirely owned by Chloe. Your charity dollars are not going to struggling families. They are paying the mortgage on her vacation home in Aspen. They are paying her personal luxury credit card bills, and they are funding my brother's failing real estate ventures. A prominent local businessman stood up from his table, his face red with fury. "Is this true, Chloe?" he shouted. "I wrote a check for $20,000 tonight." Chloe was hyperventilating, her angelic facade completely shattered. "No, no, she is lying. She is a sick woman," Chloe stammered into her own microphone, but her voice was shrill and panicky. I pulled a stack of printed bank statements from the litigator standing below the stage and tossed them onto the front tables. "Feel free to review the routing numbers yourselves," I said calmly. "I have also forwarded these exact documents to the Federal Criminal Investigation Division and the State Attorney General. The truth is, my father is not dying. My family is not being evicted by a faceless bank. They are drowning in debt because of their own greed, and they are using you to bail them out." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Donors were shouting, demanding their checks back. A woman near the front threw her champagne glass at the stage. Malik sprinted through the crowd, his face pale with terror. He grabbed Chloe by the waist and practically dragged her off the stage as she sobbed hysterically. Her white tears were finally real, but no one in the room felt an ounce of sympathy. They were furious at being conned. I walked off the stage, my posture perfect, and walked straight out the front doors of the hotel into the cool night air. My phone buzzed in my clutch before I even reached my waiting car. It was Malik. I let it go to voicemail. I knew exactly what was coming next. The charity fraud was out in the open, but the real kill shot was scheduled for tomorrow morning. That was when Malik would receive the notice of default on his loans. I got into the back seat of the car and told the driver to take me home. I checked on Aaliyah through the nanny camera app on my phone. She was sleeping peacefully, completely safe from the monsters who shared our DNA. Tomorrow, my family would be forced to face the owner of their debt. They would walk into the boardroom expecting a ruthless corporate shark, and they would find the daughter they threw away. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown corner office. I stood looking out over the city skyline, holding a cup of black coffee. It was Wednesday. Today was execution day. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a severe bun. There was no room for softness today. At exactly 8 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. "They are here," he said, "all 4 of them. They are sitting in the glass boardroom on the 50th floor. Malik looks like he is about to have a heart attack." I smiled, setting my coffee cup down on the mahogany desk. I picked up the thick black binder I had prepared and walked out of my office. 2 men in dark suits were waiting for me by the elevators. They were not corporate lawyers. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division contacts I had worked with on a massive embezzlement case 2 years prior. I had handed them the evidence of Malik and my mother's wire fraud the night before. They were more than happy to attend this little family reunion. We rode the elevator up to the 50th floor in complete silence. When the polished steel doors slid open, I walked straight down the marble hallway toward the main conference room. Through the heavy glass walls, I could see them. Malik was pacing back and forth, sweating profusely, aggressively chewing his thumbnail. My mother was sitting rigidly in a leather chair, clutching her luxury handbag like a life preserver. My father looked pale and frail, the fake heart condition suddenly looking very real. Chloe was sitting as far away from Malik as possible, her arms crossed, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room. I placed my hand on the heavy silver door handle, pushed it open, and walked inside. The federal agent stepped in right behind me, closing the door firmly and standing guard against the glass. Malik froze. His eyes widened in absolute shock. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Who told you about this meeting?" My mother stood up instantly, her face twisting into a scowl. "We do not need your help anymore, Maya," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "If you are here to embarrass us in front of the CEO, you can leave right now. We are dealing with real business today." I did not say a word. I walked to the head of the massive oak conference table, pulled out the high-backed leather executive chair, and sat down. I placed the black binder squarely in the center of the table. Malik stared at me, his brain completely failing to process the visual information. "Get out of that chair," he barked, trying to sound authoritative. The owner of the investment firm is coming in here any second. I leaned back, crossing my legs, and rested my hands lightly on the table. You wanted to meet the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. I said, my voice completely steady and cold. You wanted to meet the person who bought your commercial debt and holds the deed to your house. You are looking at her. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Chloe dropped her phone onto the floor. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. You are lying, Malik whispered, his face draining of all color. You do not have that kind of money. That portfolio was worth over $1 million. I do not need $1 million in cash to purchase distressed debt when I have the backing of a billionaire venture capitalist, I explained calmly. I manage the portfolios of the wealthiest people in this city. When I told them my brother was running a leveraged scam and using my parents' fully paid-off home as collateral, my firm was more than happy to buy the note. So let us get down to business. I own your commercial properties. I own the mortgage on the colonial house. And you owe me $1.2 million by Friday morning. My father grabbed the edge of the table, his breathing shallow. Maya, please, he gasped. We are your family. You cannot throw us out on the street. I opened the black binder. I am not throwing you out for the debt, Dad, I said, flipping to the first tab. I am throwing you out for the theft. I pulled out a stack of banking documents and slid them across the polished wood toward Malik and my mother. 5 years ago, while I was heavily medicated in a hospital bed mourning my dead husband, the two of you walked into a credit union. You presented a forged authorization form. You drained $200,000 out of a trust fund meant for my infant daughter. You used it to fly to Hawaii, and you used the rest to start a failing real estate company. My mother physically recoiled from the papers as if they were on fire. That is a lie, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass. We never touched that money. You gave it to us. You told us to take it. I reached into the binder and pulled out a digital audio recorder. I placed it on the table and pressed play. The scratchy, terrified voice of the county notary filled the room. Yes, Brenda paid me $3,000 in cash to stamp the document, the voice confessed. The daughter was not there. Brenda signed the name herself, right in front of me on the counter. I pressed stop. The room was perfectly quiet again. I looked up at the two men standing by the door. Malik, Mom, I would like you to meet Special Agent Harris and Special Agent Vance from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Malik collapsed into his chair. He put his head between his knees, hyperventilating loudly. Chloe immediately stood up, kicking her chair back. I had nothing to do with this, she screamed, pointing frantically at Malik. I did not know where the money came from. He lied to me. I am filing for divorce today. Do not look at me. My mother began to cry, but they were not the fake, manipulative tears she used at church. These were the ugly, desperate tears of a woman who knew she was finally trapped. Maya, my baby, she sobbed, reaching her hands out toward me across the table. I am your mother. You cannot send me to prison. I will die in there. You left me to give birth alone while my husband was dead in the next room, I replied, my voice completely void of emotion. You stole from your own granddaughter. I am giving you exactly 2 options. Option A, you sign every single asset you own over to me right now to cover the stolen $200,000 plus the interest. Malik signs over the business and the cars. Mom and Dad sign over the house, the Rolex, and the designer bags. You walk out of this building with nothing but the clothes on your backs. I pause, letting the severity of the deal sink into their panicked minds. Option B. I hand this binder to the agent standing by the door. They arrest you both for wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement of a minor's trust. You will face a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. Make your choice. They turned on each other instantly. It was a vicious, pathetic display. My father began screaming at my mother for ruining them. Malik begged Chloe not to leave him, but she physically pushed him away, screaming that he was a criminal. There was no loyalty. There was no family. There were just rats turning on each other on a sinking ship. Within 10 minutes, they signed the papers. My mother's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the pen. When the final signature was inked, the federal agents escorted them out of the building. I stood by the glass wall and watched them walk out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. They had nothing left. The golden child was broke and abandoned by his wife. My parents had lost their home and their social standing. 3 weeks later, I sat in my car parked across the street from my parents' old colonial house. I watched as Malik loaded cheap cardboard boxes into a rented moving truck. They were moving into a cramped, subsidized apartment on the other side of town. Chloe was long gone. My mother looked aged and broken, her arrogant posture completely destroyed. I did not feel the need to roll down the window and gloat. The revenge was already complete. I put the car in drive and pulled away, heading back to my beautiful home, my daughter, and my peaceful life. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by respect, loyalty, and love. Sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to completely burn down the bridge that connects you to your abusers. And I did not just burn the bridge. I bought the land it was built on. The drive back to my condo was entirely silent. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. Crying was a biological response to pain, and I was no longer in pain. I was operating on a level of cold, absolute clarity that only comes when the last thread of hope you have for your family is permanently severed. They had threatened to take my daughter. Chloe, with her smug smile, and her judge father thought she could wield the legal system like a weapon against a black single mother. Malik and my parents thought they could use my grief as leverage. They had vastly underestimated exactly who I was. I pulled into my garage, turned off the engine, and took one deep breath. When I walked through the front door, the house was perfectly quiet. I paid Sarah, my trusted friend and babysitter, thanking her for watching Aaliyah on such short notice. After she left, I walked quietly down the hall and peeked into my daughter's room. Aaliyah was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically, her natural curls splayed across the pink pillowcase. I stood there for a moment, letting the fierce protective instinct solidify in my chest. No one was taking her from me. Not Chloe, not Malik, not my parents. I gently closed her door and walked straight to my home office. I bypassed the comfortable living room, ignored the kitchen, and stepped into my sanctuary. I flipped the light switch illuminating my custom-built workspace. 3 massive monitors sat on a heavy oak desk connected to a secure server tower humming quietly on the floor. I tied my hair back into a tight bun, sat down in my ergonomic chair and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go to work. My family always treated my career as a joke. To them, I was just a number cruncher, a boring accountant who sat in a cubicle. They never understood what a senior forensic accountant actually does at a top-tier wealth management firm. I do not just balance ledgers, I hunt. I track offshore accounts for billionaires going through bitter divorces. I dismantle shell companies designed to hide corporate embezzlement. I find the money that people spend millions of dollars trying to conceal. I am a financial surgeon, and I know exactly where to make the cuts. I woke up my monitors and logged into my secure terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard search engines and diving directly into the state business registry databases. Malik liked to project the image of a self-made real estate mogul, constantly posting photos of construction sites and luxury cars on social media. But wealth screams, while true wealth is silent. I knew his empire was built on sand. I just needed to find the exact structural flaw. I started with his primary business entity, Malik Developments, LLC. I pulled the public tax records, the articles of incorporation, and the annual reports. He was listed as the sole proprietor. I dug deeper, running a cross-check on his business partners and registered agents. The pacing of my work was methodical, a rhythm I had perfected over a decade of high-stakes investigations. Within 20 minutes, I had mapped out a sprawling, messy web of subsidiary companies. He had created 4 different shell companies in the last 3 years, constantly shifting assets between them to create the illusion of cash flow. It was a classic shell game, the kind of amateur financial gymnastics I tore apart before my morning coffee. I pulled the property deeds connected to each LLC. That was where the real story began to unfold. Malik had purchased 3 commercial lots on the east side of the city intending to build luxury condos. But the zoning permits had been repeatedly denied. The land was sitting completely useless, draining property taxes and bleeding capital. But how did he buy the land in the first place? I ran a title search on the commercial lots and found the answer staring back at me in stark black and white text. He had taken out a massive commercial loan from a private high-risk lending group known for their predatory interest rates. They were not a traditional bank. They were the kind of lenders who gave you millions of dollars fast, but demanded collateral worth twice as much, fully intending to seize it the moment you missed a single payment. I opened the lien registry and searched for my parents' names. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I just stared at the screen as the mortgage documents materialized. Malik had cross-collateralized his commercial loan with my parents' colonial house. They had signed away the equity on a home they had owned free and clear for 20 years, just to fund his reckless ambition. And based on the default notices filed in the county records just 3 days ago, Malik had missed his last 3 balloon payments. The lenders were not bluffing. They were initiating foreclosure proceedings on everything. The $150,000 Malik demanded from me was not going to save the business. It was just the penalty fee required to delay the foreclosure by 30 days. He was throwing water on a raging forest fire. He was completely bankrupt, and he was taking my parents down with him. But the math still did not make sense. I leaned closer to the center monitor, my eyes scanning the original loan origination dates from 5 years ago. Malik needed at least 20% down in hard cash to secure that initial predatory loan. My parents did not have that kind of liquidity. Where did the initial seed money come from? I minimized the property deeds and opened the deep banking routing portals I used for complex fraud investigations. I had the legal authority to request financial histories, and I was not going to stop until I traced every single dollar back to its origin. My family wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use the court system to steal my child. They had no idea they had just invited a predator into their own financial ecosystem. I typed Malik's social security number into the terminal, hit enter, and watched the loading bar scan his entire financial history. I was not just going to defend myself. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives, dollar by dollar, document by document. The blue light of the monitors reflected off my face as the first page of banking records populated on the screen. The very first transaction I saw was a massive withdrawal, and the date attached to it made the breath catch in my throat. It was the exact same day my husband died. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and the picture they formed was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I reached for my coffee mug, taking a slow sip, as I prepared to dig into the darkest secret this family had ever buried. I clicked on the transaction details, my eyes scanning the routing numbers that led directly to a local credit union. It was time to find out exactly what they stole from me while I was busy burying the love of my life. I clicked on the transaction details, my eyes scanning the routing numbers that led directly to a local credit union. It was the exact same branch where David had banked since he was a teenager. When we found out I was pregnant with Aaliyah, the very first thing he did was open a custodial trust account there. He wanted to make sure she would always have a safety net, an education fund, a foundation for her future. David was a planner, a man who loved his family so fiercely that he prepared for every possible disaster. Except the disaster of my own blood relatives. I accessed the secure portal for the credit union, bypassing the standard consumer login and using the institutional access portal provided by my firm. I entered the account routing number and requested the archival wire transfer authorizations for that specific month. The system loaded for a few agonizing seconds. A digital PDF file appeared on my center monitor. I opened it, maximizing the window until the document filled the entire screen. It was a standard withdrawal authorization form. The amount requested was $200,000. The destination was a newly opened joint checking account under the names Malik Developments and Brenda Hayes. I stared at the sum, feeling a strange ringing in my ears. $200,000 was almost the entirety of the liquid cash David had placed in that trust. But the most damning piece of evidence was not the amount or the destination. It was the bottom right corner of the page. There, sitting on the primary custodian signature line, was my name, Maya Hayes. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes tracing the digital ink. It was not my signature. The letters were forced, the loops overly dramatic, and the pressure applied to the pen was completely wrong. I had spent years analyzing corporate documents for signs of fraudulent tampering. I knew my own handwriting intimately, and I knew my mother's handwriting even better. The heavy slanted cursive was undeniably hers. She had signed my name. I shifted my gaze to the top right corner of the document to check the official timestamp. The bank had processed and stamped the authorization at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon on October 14th. A wave of physical nausea washed over me as the reality of that date and time slammed into my chest. October 14th was the day my world ended. At 2:15 in the afternoon on that exact day, I was lying in a sterile hospital bed in the maternity ward. I was heavily medicated, hooked up to an IV drip, fading in and out of consciousness after an emergency cesarean section. David had suffered a massive aneurysm just hours before. My water had broken from the sheer trauma of watching a team of doctors try and fail to resuscitate him. I remembered waking up in that hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights burning my eyes. I remembered the cold, terrifying realization that David was gone and I was entirely alone with a newborn baby. I remembered begging the floor nurse to call my mother. I remembered the nurse returning to my bedside, her face full of pity, telling me that my mother had answered the phone but refused to come. My mother had told the nurse that she and my brother were boarding a first-class flight to Hawaii and could not be disturbed. But they were not boarding a plane at 2:15 in the afternoon. They were standing in the lobby of a local credit union. While I was bleeding in a hospital bed, mourning the love of my life and holding my fatherless daughter, my mother and my brother, were calmly handing a forged document to a bank teller. They used the chaos of David's sudden death as a smokescreen to raid my child's future. They stole the money, funneled it into Malik's vanity business, and then they got on their luxury flight to Hawaii paid for with the stolen funds. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their actions completely eradicated whatever lingering sense of familial duty I still possessed. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was not a desperate family trying to survive. This was calculated predatory theft perpetrated against a grieving widow and an infant. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the cold air into my lungs. The nausea vanished, replaced by a crystalline, hyper-focused rage. I was not going to cry. They did not deserve my tears. They deserved a legal execution. I looked at the document again, my forensic training completely taking over. A wire transfer of that magnitude from a custodial trust account required more than just a forged signature. It required verification. It required a public notary to physically witness the signature and stamp the document with their official state seal. I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There was a faded blue ink stamp next to my forged signature. The name on the stamp was Arthur Vance, a licensed county notary public. My mother could not have just walked in and signed the paper. She had to have brought this Arthur Vance with her, or she found a corrupt notary willing to look the other way for a bribe. You do not just stamp a document transferring $200,000 without verifying the identity of the person signing it. Arthur Vance was an accomplice to federal wire fraud. I picked up my cell phone from my desk. I did not call the police. The police would take months to build a case, and my family would use Chloe's father, the judge, to muddy the waters and delay the investigation. I needed absolute, undeniable leverage, and I needed it immediately. I scrolled through my encrypted contacts and dialed the number for Marcus, a private investigator our firm frequently used for high-level corporate espionage and background checks. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Good evening, Maya," he said, his voice low and professional. "What do you need?" "I need you to pull the state commission records for a notary public named Arthur Vance," I instructed, keeping my voice perfectly level. He was operating in this county 5 years ago. I have a forged financial document bearing his official stamp dated October 14th. My mother and my brother used him to authorize the theft of $200,000 from a minor's trust. I want to know where Arthur Vance lives, where he works, and what his current financial situation looks like. Consider it done, Marcus replied without hesitation. Do you want me to approach him? Not yet, I said. Just find him. I need to know exactly how much my mother paid him to risk his freedom, because I am going to offer him a deal he cannot refuse. He can either give me a full recorded confession detailing exactly what my mother and brother did in that bank lobby, or I will hand his forged stamp over to the federal authorities and let him rot in a minimum security prison for the next decade. Understood, Marcus said. I will have a full dossier on your desk by tomorrow morning. I ended the call and set the phone down. I turned back to my monitors, saving the forged document to 3 separate encrypted hard drives. The trap was beginning to take shape. My family thought they could threaten me with a custody battle to force me to pay their current debts. They had no idea I was about to drag their darkest, most well-hidden crime out into the blistering sunlight. I was not just going to stop them from taking my daughter. I was going to make sure they never saw a dime of freedom or comfort again. I was not just going to stop them from taking my daughter. I was going to make sure they never saw a dime of freedom or comfort again. The next morning, I arrived at the towering glass and steel headquarters of Sterling Wealth Management an hour before the opening bell. The trading floors were still quiet, the frantic energy of the day resting just beneath the surface. I walked past the rows of mahogany desks and headed straight for the executive suites on the top floor. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble, a steady drumbeat marching toward war. I bypassed the executive assistant and knocked twice on the heavy oak door of Richard Sterling, the billionaire founder and managing partner of the firm. Come in, Richard called out. Richard was a man who built his empire by recognizing weakness and exploiting it with surgical precision. He was sitting behind his massive desk, reviewing global market reports. He looked up surprised to see me there so early. Maya, he said, setting his reading glasses down. You are usually not on this floor unless someone is about to lose a lot of money. Someone is, I replied smoothly, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite him. But it is not one of our clients. I need a favor, Richard. A personal one, but it comes with a highly profitable distressed debt acquisition. Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. I am listening. I opened my encrypted tablet and slid it across the desk. I pulled up the financial portfolio of a predatory commercial lending group called Apex Capital. They hold a highly toxic mezzanine loan, I explained. The borrower has defaulted on 3 consecutive balloon payments. The primary asset is a series of stalled commercial lots on the east side, completely worthless due to zoning failures. However, the loan is cross-collateralized with a fully paid-off residential property in a prime suburban neighborhood. The residential property alone is worth over $900,000. The outstanding debt is $1.2 million. Richard glanced at the screen, his sharp eyes absorbing the data in seconds. Apex Capital is a group of bottom feeders, he noted. They will want to initiate foreclosure immediately to seize the residential collateral and cut their losses on the commercial lots. Why are we looking at this? Because the borrower is my brother, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. And the residential collateral is my parents' house. Richard stopped reading. He looked up at me, his expression shifting from corporate curiosity to intense scrutiny. He knew my history. He knew I was a widow, and he knew my family had never supported me. He also knew I was the most ruthless forensic accountant in his entire firm. They crossed a line yesterday, I continued, holding his gaze. They threatened to file a fraudulent petition for emergency custody of my daughter to force me to pay off this exact debt. Furthermore, I uncovered evidence last night that my brother and my mother committed federal wire fraud 5 years ago, stealing $200,000 from my daughter to fund this very business. I am not going to just defend myself in family court. I am going to completely dismantle them. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Richard's face. He did not offer empty sympathy. He offered power. What exactly do you need me to do, Maya? I need Sterling Wealth Management to create a blind shell corporation today, I said. I want you to reach out to Apex Capital and offer to buy the entire debt portfolio for $1 million in liquid cash. They are panicked about the defaults and they will jump at the chance to offload a toxic asset without dealing with a lengthy foreclosure battle. Once the firm owns the promissory note, I want to be appointed as the sole managing director of that shell corporation. I will be their bank. I will hold the deed to their house, and I will execute the foreclosure myself. Richard tapped his finger against the desk. It is a solid play, he said. Apex will take the cash discount. We secure a prime piece of real estate, and you get to drop the hammer on the people who threatened your child. Draft the incorporation papers. I will have the legal team rush the filing. What do you want to call the shell company? Obsidian Holdings. I replied without hesitating. Obsidian is formed from cooling lava. It is dark, it has sharp edges, and it cuts through anything. Richard chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. You are terrifying, Maya. I am glad you work for me. Have the paperwork on my desk by noon. We will own your brother by the end of the day. I walked out of his office feeling a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. The plan was moving perfectly. I spent the next 4 hours coordinating with our elite legal department. We expedited the registration for Obsidian Holdings, layering the ownership structure behind 3 different corporate veils, so my name would never appear on the public registry. As far as the world was concerned, Obsidian Holdings was a faceless offshore entity backed by massive institutional wealth. By 2 in the afternoon, Richard made the call to Apex Capital. Just as I predicted, the predatory lenders were desperate for liquidity. They did not care who was buying the debt as long as the wire transfer cleared. By 4 o'clock, a massive sum of liquid cash moved from a Sterling corporate account into Apex Capital's holding account. In exchange, the digital transfer of the promissory note, the commercial liens, and the absolute deed of trust to my parents' house were securely routed to my terminal. I sat in my office as the sun began to set over the city skyline, watching the final confirmation pop up on my screen. I clicked print, listening to the quiet hum of the laser printer as it produced the heavy, legally binding documents. I gathered the warm papers and laid them flat on my desk. I picked up the deed of trust to my parents' house. This was the same colonial home where I was forced to live in the smallest bedroom. The home where I was constantly told to be quiet so my brother could study. The home where my mother hosted elegant parties while I was treated like the hired help. Holding the physical ownership of that structure felt like holding the beating heart of their arrogance in the palm of my hand. I could crush it with a single signature. I was officially the owner of my family's entire financial existence. If they wanted to keep the roof over their heads, they had to answer to me. If my brother wanted to avoid bankruptcy, he had to answer to me. They were completely at my mercy, and I had absolutely none left to give. I opened a fresh document on my computer and began drafting the notice of default. I made sure the legal language was absolutely merciless. I demanded payment in full. $1.2 million due within 48 hours. There would be no extensions, no payment plans, and no grace periods. Failure to pay would result in the immediate seizure of all commercial and residential assets. My family thought they were the predators. They thought they had trapped a weak, grieving widow in a corner. They did not realize they had just sold their souls to the devil, and the devil was sitting in a high-rise office drafting their eviction notice. The shadow move was complete. Now it was time to let them feel the pressure before I delivered the final fatal blow. I locked my computer terminal and grabbed my coat. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an automated email notification that cut through the silence of my office. The sender was the Women in Business Philanthropy Board. The subject line read, VIP, Invitation to the Annual Charity Gala. I opened the message and felt a sharp, cynical smile tug at the corners of my mouth. The event was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Grand Hotel Ballroom, and the keynote speaker and primary host was none other than my sister-in-law, Chloe. She had not sent the invitation to my personal email. She sent it to my corporate address. I scrolled down to the guest list proudly displayed at the bottom of the flyer. My eyes scanned the names, and the trap became clear. Chloe had invited half the partners at Sterling Wealth Management, including several high-net-worth clients I managed. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to destroy my professional reputation. She wanted to paint me as a deranged, unstable woman in front of the people who trusted me with their millions. If she could ruin my career, she could easily convince a judge I was unfit to raise my daughter. I sat back down at my desk. Chloe wanted a public spectacle. I was going to give her one, but first I needed to know exactly what kind of charity she was running. I spent 2 hours digging into the public tax filings of the Women in Business Philanthropy Board. It did not take a forensic accountant to see the glaring irregularities, but it took one to prove them. The charity was supposed to provide grants to minority female entrepreneurs. Instead, the ledger was bleeding cash through inflated administrative costs, consulting fees paid to shell companies, and event hosting expenses that magically matched the prices of luxury vacations. Chloe was using the foundation as her personal piggy bank. She was laundering donor money to maintain her country club lifestyle while my brother's business was collapsing. I downloaded every ledger, every tax return, and every suspicious invoice onto an encrypted flash drive. I slipped it into my purse and left the office. I was ready for tomorrow. The following evening, I pulled up to the Grand Hotel in a sleek black town car. I did not wear the muted conservative colors my family always expected me to wear. I chose a tailored emerald green evening gown that commanded absolute authority. I paired it with the diamond drop earrings David had given me for our anniversary. When I stepped out of the car and walked up the grand staircase into the ballroom, I looked nothing like the struggling, mentally fragile widow Chloe desperately wanted me to be. The ballroom was spectacular, dripping in crystal chandeliers paid for by the stolen charity funds. The room was packed with the local elite. I spotted Malik near the open bar. He was nursing a scotch, looking sweaty and frantic despite his custom tuxedo. He was likely checking his phone every 5 minutes, waiting for the private lenders to call him about his defaulted loans. He had no idea the lender was currently walking across the room in an emerald dress. I saw my boss Richard standing near the VIP tables. He caught my eye and gave a slight knowing nod. He knew exactly what was about to happen. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the evening program. A hush fell over the crowd as the spotlight hit the main stage. Chloe walked out wearing a stunning white silk dress that made her look like a picture of pure angelic innocence. She stepped up to the crystal podium, adjusting the microphone with her manicured hands. Her wrists were stacked with Cartier bracelets purchased with stolen money. "Welcome, everyone," Chloe began, her voice perfectly modulated to sound humble and fragile. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This foundation means the world to me because family and community are the only things that truly matter in this dark world." The crowd murmured in polite agreement. Chloe took a deep breath, letting a single practiced tear well up in her bright blue eyes. She was an absolute master of weaponizing white tears. "Recently, my own family has been facing an unimaginable tragedy," Chloe continued, her voice trembling just enough to convey deep emotional pain. "My husband's parents, two of the most hardworking people I know, are on the verge of losing their family home due to a severe medical crisis. My father-in-law has a failing heart. We have tried everything to help them, but the financial burden is simply crushing." She paused, wiping the tear away carefully so she would not ruin her makeup. I stood at the back of the room, my face completely impassive as I watched her spin her web of lies. "What makes this tragedy so much worse," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, "is that we have family members who could easily help but refuse to do so. My sister-in-law, a widow and a single mother, has been struggling deeply with her mental health. She has become paranoid, selfish, and erratic. We are even preparing to step in and take custody of her little girl to ensure the child is raised in a safe environment. But despite having the financial means, my sister-in-law has turned her back on her dying father." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. People shook their heads in disgust. Several of my colleagues looked around, their faces lined with confusion and concern. They all knew I was a widow and a single mother. Chloe was not naming me directly, but in a room full of my professional peers, she did not have to. The implication was entirely clear. Maya is crazy, Maya is cruel, and Maya is an unfit mother. It breaks my heart to see someone consumed by such darkness. Chloe concluded, looking out over the audience with an expression of pure, fabricated pity. That is why your donations tonight are so critical. You are not just funding a charity. You are helping families like mine survive the collateral damage of mental illness and financial ruin. Thank you for your generosity. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Women at the front tables were wiping their eyes with napkins. Men were pulling out their checkbooks, completely taken in by the flawless performance. Chloe smiled bravely through her tears, accepting the adoration of the room. She thought she had won. She thought she had effectively destroyed my reputation and secured the sympathy she needed to steal my child. The applause began to fade as the waiters stepped forward to collect the donation envelopes. I did not clap. I did not hide. I simply walked forward, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor, cutting through the lingering silence of the ballroom. I walked straight down the center aisle, my eyes locked directly onto Chloe. Her smile faltered. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium. The shadow move was over. It was time for the execution. I ascended the short flight of stairs leading to the main stage. The heavy fabric of my emerald gown swept gracefully against the carpeted steps. Behind me, the two corporate litigators from my firm took their positions at the base of the stage, standing like impenetrable sentinels. Chloe took a step back from the podium, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the wood. She looked wildly toward the wings, hoping security would suddenly appear, but the guards stationed at the doors had already been discreetly informed by my lawyers that I was a registered VIP guest with full clearance. There would be no interruptions. "What are you doing up here?" Chloe hissed, her voice dropping its sweet angelic tone and turning venomous. "Get off the stage right now, Maya, or I swear I will have you arrested for trespassing." I did not answer her. I stepped right up to the podium and gently but firmly wrapped my fingers around the neck of the microphone. I pulled it free from its stand. Chloe reached out to grab it back, but I shot her a look so cold and devoid of mercy that she instinctively flinched and pulled her hand away. I turned to face the audience. The ballroom was completely silent, save for the clinking of a few forgotten wine glasses. The wealthy donors and corporate executives stared up at me, waiting for the mentally unstable widow to start screaming. They expected a breakdown. They expected drama. I gave them a corporate audit. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing crisp and perfectly steady through the state-of-the-art sound system. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Maya Hayes. I am indeed the sister-in-law Chloe was just crying about. However, I am not a struggling widow, and I am certainly not mentally unstable. I am a senior forensic accountant at Sterling Wealth Management, and I currently manage the portfolios of at least 24 people sitting in this room right now. A collective gasp rippled through the front tables. I saw a state senator I had played golf with last month sit up entirely straight, his eyes wide with recognition. Several of my firm's clients leaned forward, whispering frantically to their spouses. They knew my reputation. They knew I was the woman who caught million-dollar discrepancies in offshore accounts. Chloe lunged forward, grabbing my forearm. "You are ruining everything." She panicked, her voice caught in her throat. "Stop talking." I smoothly pulled my arm out of her grasp and gestured to the audio-visual technician sitting in the booth at the back of the ballroom. I had visited him 10 minutes before the gala started, handing him my encrypted flash drive, along with a crisp $100 bill and a very specific set of instructions. "Hit the slides," I commanded over the microphone. The massive digital screen behind Chloe and me flickered out of its standby mode. The elegant logo of the Women in Business Philanthropy Board vanished. In its place, a massive, highly detailed financial pie chart illuminated the stage, casting a harsh blue light over Chloe's pale face. The chart was segmented into clear, bold colors, each labeled with precise dollar amounts and routing numbers. "Since we are all gathered here tonight to discuss financial burdens and helping the needy, let us take a transparent look at where your generous donations are actually going," I announced, projecting my voice to reach the very back rows. According to the federal tax filings and Cayman Island banking routes I pulled directly from the foundation ledgers yesterday, exactly 82% of the funds raised by this charity over the last 2 years have never reached a single minority female entrepreneur. The murmur in the crowd grew louder, shifting from confusion to outright alarm. I clicked the remote in my hand, advancing to the next slide. A detailed spreadsheet appeared highlighting specific wire transfers. As you can see here on the screen, those funds have been systematically funneled directly into a private offshore account through a series of ghost consulting fees. I continued pacing slowly across the stage. That account is entirely owned and operated by Chloe. Your charity dollars are not going to struggling families or small businesses. They are paying the mortgage on her luxury vacation home in Aspen. They are paying off her personal platinum credit card bills. And they are being illegally loaned to my brother's failing commercial real estate ventures. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen flashed to a side-by-side comparison. On the left was an invoice for a supposed entrepreneurial training seminar billed to the charity for $45,000. On the right was a receipt from a private yacht charter in Monaco booked by Chloe for the exact same amount on the exact same date. A prominent local businessman sitting at the VIP table stood up, pushing his chair back violently. It scraped loudly against the floor. "Is this true, Chloe?" he shouted, his face turning a deep shade of red. "I wrote a check for $20,000 tonight, specifically for the small business grant program." Chloe was hyperventilating now. She backed away from the screen as if the numbers were physically attacking her. Her flawless, philanthropic facade completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, exposed fraud. "No, no, she is lying," Chloe stammered into her own headset microphone, her voice shrill and panicky. "She is a sick woman. She forged those documents." I reached out to the litigator standing below the stage. He handed me a thick stack of printed bank statements bound in heavy legal folders. I tossed them onto the front tables where they landed with heavy definitive thuds. "Feel free to review the actual routing numbers yourselves," I said calmly, maintaining my iron grip on the room. "Every document in those folders has been certified by my firm. Furthermore, I have already forwarded these exact digital files to the Federal Criminal Investigation Division and the State Attorney General. This foundation is a sophisticated money laundering operation designed to keep my brother and his wife living in luxury while they exploit your generosity." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Waiters stopped dead in their tracks. Donors were shouting, demanding their checks back from the foundation volunteers. A woman near the front threw her champagne glass at the stage. It shattered against the steps, raining crystal shards onto the carpet. "The truth is," I said, raising my voice one final time to cut through the uproar, "my father is not dying of a heart condition. My family is not being evicted by a faceless bank. They are drowning in debt because of their own greed, and they are trying to use you to bail them out. Do not write another check." I turned to look at Chloe. She had dropped to her knees on the stage, covering her face with her hands. The pristine white silk of her dress pooled around her, looking like a surrendered flag. The elegant image she had carefully curated over the years was completely eradicated in less than 5 minutes. All the microaggressions, all the condescending remarks about my home, all the threats to take my daughter, had culminated in this exact moment of public devastation. She had invited the elite of the city to witness my humiliation, and instead, she had handed me the perfect audience for her own execution. I did not feel a shred of pity. I looked past her toward the bar area where Malik had been standing. The spot was empty. My brother, the golden child, had abandoned his wife the second the pie chart appeared on the screen. He was running, terrified of the consequences, leaving Chloe to face the wrath of the billionaires she had swindled. I set the microphone back onto the podium. The feedback whined sharply through the speakers, making several people in the front row wince. I turned my back on Chloe, on the screaming donors, and on the ruined gala. I walked down the stairs, rejoining my litigators. The trap had been sprung perfectly. But this was only the first phase of their destruction. The real reckoning was waiting for them tomorrow morning. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The chaos from the gala had spilled into the morning news cycle. I turned on the television in my living room. The local news anchor stood outside the Grand Hotel, recounting the dramatic collapse of the charity. They played a cell phone video of Chloe sobbing on the stage while donors shouted demands for refunds. The anchor confirmed the state attorney general had officially opened a preliminary investigation into the charity's financial records based on the files my firm provided. Chloe was ruined. She would never show her face in society again, but I had a schedule to keep. I walked into my home office and logged into my secure terminal. It was exactly 8:30. I opened the tracking portal for the private courier service my firm utilized for highly sensitive legal deliveries. I arranged for two separate packages to be delivered simultaneously at exactly 9:00. One package was heading to Malik's downtown office. The other was heading to my parents' colonial house. I watched the digital tracking dots move across the map on my monitor. My family was completely oblivious to the financial guillotine suspended directly above their heads. At exactly 9:00, the first delivery notification popped up on my screen. Signature acquired at Malik Developments, LLC. A minute later, the second notification appeared. Signature acquired at the Hayes family residence. The notices of default had been officially served. I leaned back in my chair and waited. I knew exactly what Malik was reading in his office. The heavy legal document was stamped with the imposing seal of Obsidian Holdings. The language inside was cold, precise, and absolutely unforgiving. It stated the previous lending firm had sold the entirety of his commercial debt portfolio. Obsidian Holdings was now the sole proprietor of his loans. And because he had missed 3 consecutive payments, he was officially in default. The new owner was calling in the entire note immediately. The demand was clear. Malik had 48 hours to produce $1.2 million in liquid funds. If the money was not wired into the specified holding account by 9 in the morning on Friday, Obsidian Holdings would immediately seize all of his commercial real estate properties. Furthermore, the company would execute the foreclosure on my parents' residential property. They would be evicted. There was no option for negotiation. It was a complete financial death sentence. I watched the clock on my monitor. It took 15 minutes for Malik to process the reality of the document. At 9:16, my cell phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. The caller ID flashed my brother's name. I let it ring 4 times before I calmly answered the call. "Maya, you have to help me," Malik gasped, his voice trembling with sheer panic. He was a terrified, broken man watching his entire life evaporate. "What do you want, Malik?" I asked, keeping my tone completely flat. "After the stunt you and your wife pulled last night, I am amazed you have the audacity to call my number. I am sorry about last night, Maya." He pleaded, his words rushing out in a frantic blur. Chloe lost her mind. "I am leaving her, Maya. She is toxic and she ruined my reputation. But please, you have to listen to me right now. I just got served with a notice of default." "A notice of default?" I repeated, feigning ignorance. "I thought you had until Friday to pay the private lenders the $150,000. They sold the debt, Maya," he cried out, a note of absolute hysteria creeping into his voice. "They sold the whole portfolio to some massive corporate holding company called Obsidian Holdings. This new company is ruthless. They are calling in the entire note, $1.2 million by Friday morning. If I do not pay them, they are taking my commercial lots. They are taking Mom and Dad's house. My business is finished, Maya." "That sounds like a very difficult situation for you," I said. "You should probably start packing." "Maya, please, do not do this," he begged, his pride shattered. "I know we have had our differences, but you are a senior forensic accountant. You deal with corporate holding companies all the time. You must know a legal loophole. You have to know a way to file an injunction or stall the foreclosure. Please, Maya, I am begging you on my hands and knees. I need your help to save our family." The irony was almost too sweet to endure. The brother who had spent his entire life treating me like I was inferior was now begging me to save him from a monster he did not realize I had created. He wanted me to use my professional expertise to fight the big bad corporate entity, completely unaware that I was the very entity he was terrified of. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment, letting him sweat in his panic. "I cannot fight a legally binding promissory note, Malik," I finally said. "You signed the paperwork. You put the house up for collateral. This Obsidian Holdings holds all the cards. They own you. There has to be something we can do." Malik sobbed. Mom is having a panic attack right now. Dad is calling lawyers, but nobody will take the case. We are going to lose everything, Maya. Please, you have to help us negotiate with them. I am not a miracle worker, Malik, I replied coldly. I suggest you figure out a way to come up with the $1.2 million. Or you can proceed with your pathetic plan to sue me for custody of my daughter. Let us see how a judge views your petition when you are a bankrupt fraud. I hung up before he could reply. Let them dig their grave a little deeper before I finally push them in. I placed my phone face down on the desk, taking a deep breath to center myself. The panic in Malik's voice was satisfying, but it also served as a blaring warning siren. Desperate people do not act rationally, and my parents were currently backed into a corner with a $1.2 million gun pointed at their heads. Malik would have immediately called them after I hung up, relaying my refusal to help. I knew my mother. She would not accept defeat. She would escalate. Her favorite weapon had always been public embarrassment, and her ultimate leverage was my daughter. I immediately called the director of Aaliyah's private kindergarten. I instructed them to place my daughter on a strict security hold, meaning absolutely no one but me was authorized to pick her up or even see her. Then I called Richard at the firm. I need 2 armed security contractors to meet me at the elementary school for the afternoon pickup, I told him. My family is drowning, and they are going to try to drag my child down with them. Richard did not ask questions. He simply promised the men would be waiting for me. At 2:30, I pulled my SUV up to the curb outside the exclusive private school. The tree-lined street was filled with luxury vehicles and chatting parents waiting for the bell to ring. Just as Richard promised, 2 large men in immaculate dark suits were standing discreetly near the main gates. They nodded briefly as I approached, falling into step slightly behind me. I did not have to wait long for the ambush. A rusted silver sedan aggressively pulled into the loading zone, screeching to a halt entirely too close to the crosswalk. The doors swung open, and my mother Brenda stepped out. She looked entirely unhinged. Her usually perfect hair was frayed, her makeup was uneven, and she was wearing the same clothes she had worn to the disastrous family dinner. My father Calvin climbed out of the passenger side, leaning heavily on his cane, looking more genuinely frail than he ever had in his life. Trailing behind them was a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, carrying a thick manila envelope. He looked like the kind of bottom-feeding lawyer who advertised on highway billboards. Maya, my mother shrieked, her voice cutting through the polite chatter of the wealthy parents standing nearby. Several heads turned in our direction. I signaled for the security contractors to hold their position but stay close. I walked calmly down the paved pathway to meet my parents halfway, ensuring they could not get anywhere near the actual school entrance. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I told the school administration you are not welcome on this campus." My father slammed his cane against the pavement, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. "We are here to serve you, Maya," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "We tried to do this the nice way. We tried to ask for your help. But you want to be stubborn and watch your family be destroyed by some faceless corporation. So now we are doing this the hard way." The sleazy lawyer stepped forward, holding out the manila envelope. "Maya Hayes," he said in a nasally voice, "you are being formally served with an emergency petition for grandparents' rights and a temporary custody injunction." I did not reach for the envelope. One of my security guards stepped forward smoothly, intercepting the package from the lawyer's hand and stepping back without saying a word. My mother crossed her arms, a triumphant sneer stretching across her exhausted face. "Chloe's father might have backed out because of the charity scandal, but we found someone else to file the paperwork," she hissed, leaning closer to me. "The judge is going to look at a wealthy widow who refuses to help her dying father, and he is going to see an unstable, selfish woman. We are filing for an emergency removal, Maya. They will take Aaliyah from you tonight." She paused, waiting for the tears. She was waiting for me to break down, to drop to my knees and beg her to drop the lawsuit. She was waiting for me to offer my checkbook in exchange for my child. Instead, I laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that made the sleazy lawyer take a physical step backward. You are threatening me with a custody battle, I asked, shaking my head in pure disbelief. Mom, you and Dad just received a notice of default on a $900,000 mortgage. You have zero liquid assets. Your golden son is currently being investigated for charity fraud alongside his wife, and his businesses are completely underwater. How exactly do you plan to prove to a family court judge that you can provide a stable environment for a 5-year-old child when you will not even have a roof over your own heads by Friday morning? The sneer vanished from my mother's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine terror. We will figure it out, she stammered. We will stall the foreclosure. We will fight Obsidian Holdings in court. You cannot fight a legal promissory note when you are completely broke, I stated, stating the facts with the clinical precision of an auditor. You signed the collateral agreement. Obsidian Holdings is going to take your house, and there is absolutely nothing your cheap lawyer can do to stop them. My father glared at me, his chest heaving. You have the money, Maya, he growled. You could pay Obsidian Holdings right now and make this all go away. If you write the check today, we will withdraw the custody petition. It is entirely up to you. Save your parents or lose your daughter. It was extortion, plain and simple. They were attempting to ransom my own child to pay for their mistakes. The sheer audacity was almost impressive, but it only solidified my resolve to completely ruin them. I took a step closer to my mother, invading her personal space, until I could smell the stale coffee and panic radiating off her skin. The security guards shifted behind me, radiating an unspoken threat that kept my father and the lawyer firmly in place. I am not giving you a single dime, I whispered, my voice dropping to a deadly calm frequency. You can take that ridiculous piece of paper and throw it in the trash because no judge in this state is going to grant custody to bankrupt fraudsters. You chose to risk your home to fund Malik's ego. You chose to abandon me when David died, and now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your choices. I looked from my mother to my father, locking eyes with the man who had always enabled her cruelty. You have exactly 24 hours until the bank takes your house, I said. I suggest you go home and start packing your belongings. Enjoy your last night in a real bed. I turned my back on them, signaling to the guards. The school bell rang, echoing loudly across the courtyard. Aaliyah came running out of the front doors, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. I crouched down, opening my arms, and caught her in a tight embrace. When I stood back up and looked toward the street, my parents and their lawyer were already walking back to their rusted car, their shoulders slumped in total defeat. They thought they had played their final trump card. They had no idea the actual game had not even started yet. Malik would soon call Obsidian Holdings begging for a meeting to save their home. And I was going to gladly accept the invitation. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet, peaceful blur. I gave Aaliyah a bath, read her a bedtime story, and tucked her under her warm blankets. I stood in her doorway, watching her sleep, making a silent vow that the people who tried to use her as a pawn would never be allowed near her again. As I closed her door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Richard. The trap was officially locked. Malik had spent the entire afternoon frantically calling the proxy numbers listed on the notice of default. He had begged, cried, and pleaded with the corporate receptionist for a face-to-face meeting with the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. Richard had authorized the appointment for 9 o'clock the next morning. I instructed Richard to book the largest glass-enclosed boardroom on the executive floor. I wanted my family to sit in a vast, intimidating space, feeling as small and insignificant as they truly were. After hanging up with Richard, I made a quick call to Marcus, my private investigator. He confirmed that the county notary, Arthur Vance, had folded immediately when presented with the evidence of his forged stamp. Vance had provided a full, legally binding recorded confession detailing exactly how my mother paid him $3,000 in cash to validate the fraudulent trust withdrawal. I sent the encrypted audio file directly to Special Agent Harris at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. He confirmed he would meet me at the office at 8:45. The next morning, I woke up with a profound sense of clarity. There was no anxiety, no lingering sadness, and absolutely no guilt. I dressed with absolute precision, choosing a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and a pair of black stiletto heels. I pulled my natural hair back into a sleek, severe bun. I looked in the mirror, and I did not see the scapegoat daughter they had belittled for decades. I did not see the grieving widow they had abandoned in a hospital. I saw the executioner they had created. I arrived at the Sterling Wealth Management building at 8 o'clock sharp. Richard met me in the opulent marble lobby, handing me a thick black binder. It contained the final printed copies of the property deeds, the promissory notes, the default judgments, and the bank routing histories. He patted my shoulder, giving me a fierce approving nod. I rode the private glass elevator up to the 50th floor. The executive boardroom was a massive space surrounded by floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass walls, offering a dizzying view of the sprawling city below. At exactly 8:50, the front desk receptionist buzzes my secure line. The Hayes family had arrived. I instructed her to escort them to the glass boardroom and offer them water, but absolutely nothing else. I stepped out of my office and walked quietly down the thick carpeted hallway, standing just out of sight behind a large marble pillar. I could see them clearly through the glass walls. They looked completely pathetic, a hollow shell of the arrogant family that had invaded my home just days prior. My father was wearing a stiff, outdated suit, gripping his wooden cane tightly, his knuckles white with tension. My mother had tried to resurrect her wealthy matriarch persona, wearing her heavy pearl necklace and carrying her Hermes bag, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her absolute terror. Malik was pacing the length of the room, tugging nervously at his collar, his face shining with cold sweat. And surprisingly, Chloe was sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. Despite screaming about a divorce at the gala, she had clearly shown up hoping to bat her eyelashes at the billionaire CEO and somehow exempt herself from the impending financial slaughter. At 8:55, the heavy wooden doors at the end of the executive hallway swung open. Special Agent Harris and Special Agent Vance walked toward me, dressed in sharp dark suits, with their federal badges clearly visible clipped to their belts. We exchanged brief professional nods. There was no need for small talk. We all knew exactly what the objective was today. I picked up the thick black binder, gripping it tightly in my right hand. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar and walked toward the boardroom. My heels struck the polished floor with a rhythmic, commanding sound, echoing loudly in the quiet corridor. Inside the glass room, Malik stopped pacing. He looked toward the door, expecting to see an older, intimidating billionaire flanked by a team of ruthless corporate lawyers. Instead, he saw his younger sister walking purposefully toward him, flanked by two federal agents. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The air conditioning in the room was running high, but the atmosphere instantly turned suffocating. The agents stepped inside right behind me, closing the heavy door firmly and taking their positions blocking the only exit. For a full 10 seconds, nobody took a single breath. My mother dropped her luxury handbag onto the floor. It landed with a soft, dull thud. Malik stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. Chloe shrank back into her massive leather executive chair, her eyes darting frantically between me and the federal badges shining on the agents' belts. "What are you doing here?" Malik finally choked out, his voice cracking violently. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an explanation. "Are you working for them, Maya? Did you use your corporate connections to get us this meeting?" I did not answer him immediately. I walked slowly to the head of the massive mahogany table. I placed the heavy black binder squarely in the center, lining it up perfectly with the edge of the wood. I pulled out the high-backed leather executive chair and sat down, crossing my legs smoothly. I folded my hands, resting them deliberately on top of the binder. I looked at each of them, letting my cold gaze burn into their terrified faces. "I am not working for Obsidian Holdings, Malik," I said, my voice perfectly level and utterly devoid of mercy. "You begged the receptionist for an emergency meeting with the CEO. You wanted to sit down with the person who bought your commercial debt and currently holds the deed to your house. You wanted to look the owner in the eye and beg for a 30-day extension." I opened the binder and pulled out the absolute deed of trust to the colonial house. I slid the heavy legal document across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of my father. "Well, here I am," I announced, leaning forward slightly. "I am Obsidian Holdings, I own your commercial lots. I own your failing construction company. And as of yesterday afternoon, I own the house you sleep in. My father stared down at the deed, his hands shaking so violently he could not even pick up the piece of paper. My mother let out a high-pitched, gasping sound, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "This is a sick joke," she whispered, her eyes wide with absolute shock. "You do not have millions of dollars, Maya. This is a trick. You hacked into their corporate system." "I did not need millions of my own cash, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone completely clinical and detached. "I manage the portfolios of some of the wealthiest and most powerful venture capitalists in this country." When I explained that my brother was running a leveraged real estate scam and that my family was trying to maliciously steal my daughter, my firm was more than happy to purchase the note on your debt. The debt is entirely real. The default is legally binding. You owe me $1.2 million by tomorrow morning. The heavy silence in the glass boardroom was so thick, it felt like it was physically crushing them. Malik stared at me, his jaw completely slack, unable to comprehend the absolute reality of his destruction. He looked down at the deed of trust resting on the mahogany table, and then looked back up at me, his eyes filling with a desperate, pathetic kind of hope. "Maya, please," he stammered, his voice dropping an octave as he tried to adopt his old authoritative tone. "You proved your point. You are smart. You outplayed me. But you cannot actually expect me to come up with $1.2 million in 24 hours. I am your brother. We can restructure this. I will give you equity in the company. I will pay you back with 20% interest. Just give me 6 months." Chloe leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the table, her expensive diamond rings catching the overhead light. "Maya, we are family," she said, her voice dripping with that same fake sweetness she used at the charity gala. "We have had our misunderstandings, but we are sisters. You do not want to see your niece and nephew grow up with a bankrupt father. We can fix this together." I looked at Chloe, feeling a deep, profound disgust. "You do not have a niece or nephew, Chloe," I replied, keeping my voice completely even and detached. "You have an offshore account funded by stolen charity money, which the state attorney general is currently freezing. And Malik, I do not want equity in your failing company. Your commercial lots are worthless. Your business is a shell game. You have absolutely nothing of value to offer me." My father slammed his cane against the floor. "You vindictive, ungrateful girl," he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "We gave you everything. We fed you and clothed you. You are going to sign that deed back over to us right now, or I swear to God I will ruin you in this city. I will tell everyone what you did to your own parents." "You already tried that," I reminded him calmly. "You tried to ruin me at the charity gala. You tried to steal my daughter yesterday at her school. You have no moves left, Dad." I opened the black binder to the second tab. "But we are not just here to discuss your defaulted loan." I continued, my voice cutting through his anger like a scalpel. "We are here to discuss exactly how Malik Developments was funded in the first place." I pulled out the high-resolution copies of the credit union withdrawal forms. I slid them across the table. One copy stopped in front of Malik, and the other stopped in front of my mother. 5 years ago, on October 14th, I was in the maternity ward, I said, stating the facts with the clinical precision of a forensic audit. My husband David had just died from a massive aneurysm. My water broke from the trauma. I called you, Mom. I begged you to come to the hospital. You told the nurse you were boarding a first-class flight to Hawaii and could not be bothered. My mother shrank back into her chair, her face turning the color of ash. She refused to look at the documents on the table. "But you were not at the airport," I continued. "You and Malik were standing in the lobby of David's credit union. You presented a custodial trust withdrawal form. You forged my signature while I was heavily medicated and grieving. You stole $200,000 from your own infant granddaughter. You used that money to fund Malik's vanity real estate project and to pay for your luxury vacation." "That is a lie," Malik yelled, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed to the floor behind him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are making this up. You cannot prove any of that. You gave us that money." I did not argue with him. I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a digital audio recorder. I placed it perfectly in the center of the table and pressed the play button. The quiet boardroom was suddenly filled with the terrified, scratchy voice of Arthur Vance, the county notary. Yes, Brenda Hayes paid me $3,000 in cash, the recorded voice confessed. The daughter was not there. Brenda signed the name herself right in front of me on the counter. She told me the daughter was too sick to come in, but they needed the money for a business emergency. I stamped it. I knew it was wrong, but I took the money. I pressed stop. The recording clicked off, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. My mother began to hyperventilate loudly. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, and she gripped the edges of her Hermes bag so tightly her knuckles looked like they might snap. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting toward the two silent men standing guard by the door. Speaking of those men, I gestured toward the door. I would like to formally introduce Special Agent Harris and Special Agent Vance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Harris stepped forward, his face completely stoic. Brenda Hayes and Malik Hayes, he said, his voice deep and authoritative. We have reviewed the financial documents and the recorded confession regarding the forged trust withdrawal. We are currently preparing federal warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and the embezzlement of a minor's trust. Malik completely collapsed. He did not simply sit down, he literally fell to his knees beside the mahogany table, gasping for air. He grabbed the edge of the wood, pulling himself up just enough to look at me. His arrogant facade was completely annihilated. He was nothing but a terrified little boy caught in a trap he built himself. "Maya, please," he sobbed, his tears dropping onto the polished floor. "I am so sorry. I was desperate. I wanted to be successful. I wanted Mom and Dad to be proud of me. Please do not let them send me to prison. I will do anything. I will work for the rest of my life to pay you back. Please, Maya, I am your brother." My mother slid out of her chair, joining him on the floor. She reached her shaking hands out toward me, her face wet with genuine terrified tears. "Maya, my baby girl," she wailed. "Please have mercy. I am your mother. I am an old woman. I will die in a federal prison. Please forgive me." I looked down at the people who had terrorized me my entire life. I looked at the woman who abandoned me while my husband was in the morgue. I looked at the brother who treated me like garbage and tried to steal my daughter. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just the cold, clean satisfaction of an unbalanced ledger finally being corrected. "I am giving you exactly two options," I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the massive room. "Option A, you sign every single asset you currently own over to me right now. Malik signs over the business, the commercial lots, the bank accounts, and the vehicles. Mom and Dad sign over the deed to the house, the jewelry, and the designer bags. Every single penny goes to repaying the $200,000 you stole from Aaliyah, plus 5 years of compounding interest. You walk out of this building with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your backs." I paused, letting the absolute devastation of that choice sink into their panicked minds. Option B. I hand this entire black binder to Agent Harris right now. He walks you out of this building in handcuffs, and you both face a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. Make your choice right now because my patience expired 5 years ago. They looked at each other, their faces twisted in absolute horror. The reality of their situation was inescapable. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, theft, and arrogance. And now the foundation had completely collapsed, burying them under the weight of their own sins. I sat back in the leather chair, crossed my arms, and waited for them to completely surrender. The silence in the room shattered, as the instinct for self-preservation completely overrode whatever twisted loyalty they had left. Chloe was the first to break. She pushed her heavy leather chair back violently and stood up, pointing a trembling manicured finger at Malik. "I am not going to prison for you!" she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the soundproof glass walls. "I had nothing to do with that trust fund. I did not forge anything. I am filing for divorce this afternoon, and I am calling my father to make sure he completely distances our family from this criminal mess." Malik looked up at his wife, his face contorted in absolute disbelief. "You spent every dime of that money, Chloe," he fired back, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. You wore the diamonds. You flew first class to Aspen. You knew exactly where the cash was coming from, and you did not care. Chloe let out a dark, hysterical laugh. I am a victim here, Malik. You lied to me. She turned toward me, her eyes wide with desperate calculation. Maya, you know I had nothing to do with this. I will testify against them. I will tell the FBI everything they want to know. Just leave me out of the financial seizure. I looked at her without blinking. Your charity accounts are already frozen by the State Attorney General, Chloe stated plainly. You do not have anything left for me to seize. You are completely bankrupt, and you will likely face state charges for embezzlement. You should probably leave before I ask my security team to physically remove you from this floor. Chloe let out a strangled sob, grabbed her designer coat, and ran out of the boardroom. She did not look back at Malik once. The great romance was officially dead. My father turned his fury entirely on my mother. He slammed his cane against the table, his face purple with rage. You stupid, arrogant woman, he roared, spitting the words at her. You ruined us for this worthless boy. You forged a federal document. You signed away our house for a failed business. Sign the papers right now, Brenda. Sign them all, or I swear I will let the feds take you away today. My mother recoiled as if she had been slapped. I did it for our son Calvin, she wept, her chest heaving. We had to help him. You wanted him to succeed just as much as I did. I wanted him to succeed legally, my father yelled back, completely abandoning his sick old man persona. I did not tell you to rob your own granddaughter. I am not going to spend the rest of my life visiting you in a federal penitentiary. Agent Harris stepped forward, the metallic clink of his handcuffs echoing clearly in the quiet room. You have exactly 60 seconds to make a decision, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. If those documents are not signed, I am placing Brenda and Malik Hayes under immediate federal arrest. Malik broke completely. He scrambled up from the floor, grabbed the heavy gold pen resting on the mahogany table, and began frantically signing his name. His hands shook so violently the ink smeared across the heavy parchment. He signed away his commercial properties. He signed away the business entity he had built with stolen money. He signed over the title to his luxury vehicles. When he was finished, he pushed the papers toward my mother. Mom, please, he begged, his voice reduced to a pathetic whimper. I cannot go to prison. Please sign the deed. My mother looked at the golden child she had sacrificed everything for. She looked at the man who was perfectly willing to let her become homeless just to save his own skin. With a shaking hand, she took the pen. She signed the absolute deed of trust, transferring ownership of her beloved colonial home directly to Obsidian Holdings. Take off the watch, Malik. I ordered, my voice slicing through the sound of my mother's crying. Malik hastily unclasped the $40,000 gold Rolex and slid it across the table. Mom, the jewelry, I added. My mother unclasped her heavy pearl necklace and placed it on the table. She took off her diamond rings and set them next to the pearls. I carefully gathered the signed documents, placing them neatly back into the black binder. I closed the cover with a sharp, definitive snap. The transaction is complete, I announced, standing up from the executive chair. You have until noon on Friday to vacate the residential property. If you leave so much as a single piece of trash on the floor, I will have my lawyers bill you for the cleaning fees. The federal agents stepped aside, opening the heavy glass doors. Get out, I said. They did not say another word. My father limped out first, not even looking back at his wife. Malik followed, staring at the floor, completely broken. My mother was the last to leave. She looked at me one final time, her eyes completely hollow. She had nothing left. The family she had built on a foundation of lies was completely destroyed. 3 weeks later, the autumn air was crisp and cold. I sat in my parked SUV across the street from the large colonial house in the affluent suburb. A rusted moving truck was backed into the sweeping circular driveway. I watched through the tinted glass as Malik carried a cheap cardboard box out the front door. He looked exhausted. He had lost weight, and the expensive tailored suits were gone, replaced by a worn-out sweatshirt. My father followed him, carrying a small lamp. They were moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a low-income neighborhood on the edge of the city. Chloe had successfully filed for divorce and was currently living in a cheap motel while awaiting her preliminary hearing for the charity fraud. My mother walked out onto the porch, holding a single framed photograph. She looked around the manicured lawn, the heated pool, and the large brick facade. She was saying goodbye to the only thing she had ever truly loved, which was her image. I did not roll down the window. I did not honk the horn. I did not need to gloat or rub salt in their wounds. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them behind forever. I drove back to my peaceful condo where my beautiful daughter was waiting for me. I had secured her future, and I had protected her from the poison of my bloodline. Family is not determined by DNA. Family is not an excuse for abuse, manipulation, or theft. Family is supposed to be the safe harbor in a storm, not the storm itself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to completely walk away from the people who share your last name. You have to be willing to burn down the toxic roots so the healthy branches can finally grow. My name is Maya. I survived the darkest day of my life, and I built an empire from the ashes. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving betrayal and taking back your power. The silence in the glass boardroom was absolute and suffocating. Malik gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He pushed himself up his chair, scraping violently against the polished hardwood floor. "That is impossible!" he screamed, his voice cracking as it echoed off the soundproof glass walls. "You do not have that kind of capital, Maya. You are an accountant. You just crunch numbers for rich people. You do not buy million-dollar commercial debt portfolios." I sat back in the high-backed leather executive chair, crossing my legs smoothly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I do not need $1 million in liquid cash sitting in my personal checking account to execute a corporate acquisition, Malik. I explained, my tone as clinical and detached as a surgeon holding a scalpel. I manage the portfolios of some of the wealthiest venture capitalists in this state. When I brought this predatory loan to my managing partner and explained the underlying collateral, he saw an incredibly lucrative opportunity. Obsidian Holdings was incorporated 48 hours ago, specifically to acquire your debt. You thought you were dealing with a faceless corporate entity, but you were dealing with me. I own the promissory note. I own the commercial liens, and I hold the absolute deed of trust to the house you all sleep in. My father Calvin sank lower into his seat, his wooden cane slipping from his grasp and clattering loudly onto the floor. "You cannot do this, Maya," he gasped, clutching his chest. "We are your family. You are talking about making your own parents homeless over a business loan. I am talking about enforcing a legally binding contract," I replied smoothly. "A contract you willingly signed when you decided to cross-collateralize your fully paid-off home to fund Malik's vanity projects." Malik was hyperventilating now. Sweat beaded on his forehead and rolled down his neck, staining the collar of his expensive dress shirt. "Maya, please," he stammered, the arrogance completely draining from his body, leaving behind a terrified, desperate shell. "We can restructure this. I will give you 50% equity in the real estate development company. I will pay you back with 20% interest. Just give me 6 months to clear the zoning permits. If you foreclose on Friday morning, you destroy my entire life." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "You do not have a real estate development company, Malik," I said softly. "You have a massive Ponzi scheme built on stolen money. Your commercial lots are worthless. Your business is a shell game. You have absolutely nothing of value to offer me. And we are not just here today to discuss your defaulted loan." I reached out and placed my hand on the thick black binder sitting in the center of the table. I flipped it open. The sharp snap of the metal rings echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. My mother Brenda whimpered, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. Chloe sat frozen in her seat, her eyes darting between the binder and the two federal agents standing silently by the door. "We are here to discuss exactly how Malik Developments was funded in the first place," I announced, pulling a thick stack of high-resolution banking documents from the first tab. I slid the papers across the polished wood. One stack stopped directly in front of Malik. The other stopped in front of my mother. "Take a close look at the dates on those withdrawal authorizations," I commanded. 5 years ago, on October 14th, I was lying in the maternity ward of Seattle General Hospital. My husband David had just died from a massive aneurysm. My water broke from the sheer trauma of watching a medical team fail to resuscitate the love of my life. I called you Mom. I begged you to come to the hospital. You told the floor nurse you were boarding a first-class flight to Hawaii and could not be bothered to cancel your vacation. My mother shrank back from the documents as if they were covered in poison. I did not know how bad it was. "Maya," she sobbed, her voice high and panicked. "I did not understand." "You understood perfectly," I cut her off, my voice dropping to a deadly frequency. "You understood that I was heavily medicated, grieving, and completely incapacitated. Because you were not at the airport that afternoon. You and Malik were standing in the lobby of David's credit union." Malik physically recoiled from the table, shaking his head frantically. "No, no, no," he repeated, a desperate mantra of denial. "You presented a custodial trust withdrawal form to the bank teller." I continued, relentlessly tracing the financial execution step by step. "You forged my signature. You drained $200,000 out of an educational trust fund meant for your own infant niece. You used that money to fund Malik's initial startup capital, and you used the remainder to pay for your luxury Hawaiian vacation." I tracked the wire routing numbers. I pulled the digital timestamps. I even pulled the security camera stills from the bank lobby, showing the two of you standing at the teller's desk at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. "That is a complete lie," Malik yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You gave us that money, Maya. You authorized that transfer. You cannot prove any of this." I did not argue. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. I placed it perfectly in the center of the table next to the black binder and pressed the play button. The quiet boardroom was suddenly filled with a terrified, scratchy voice. It was Arthur Vance, the county notary public, whose stamp appeared on the forged documents. "Yes, Brenda Hayes paid me $3,000 in cash," the recorded voice confessed, filling every corner of the room. The daughter was not there. Brenda signed the name herself right in front of me on the counter. She told me the daughter was too sick to come in, but they needed the cash for a business emergency. I stamped it. I knew it was illegal, but I took the bribe. I pressed stop. The recording clicked off, leaving a ringing, deafening silence in its wake. My mother let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She collapsed forward, burying her face in her arms on the mahogany table. Chloe covered her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror, as she realized the true extent of the criminal enterprise she had married into. My father stared at my mother, his face twisting in a mixture of profound disgust and terror. Malik stood completely paralyzed, his mouth open, but unable to form a single word. His ego, his pride, his entire identity as the golden child was completely pulverized. He was exposed as nothing more than a common thief. I looked toward the heavy glass doors and nodded. Special Agent Harris and Special Agent Vance stepped forward, their leather shoes thudding heavily against the floor. They moved with military precision, stopping just behind the chairs where my brother and mother sat. "Brenda Hayes and Malik Hayes." Special Agent Harris said, his voice a deep, authoritative rumble that offered absolutely zero room for negotiation. "We have reviewed the forensic financial documents, the banking routing histories, the security footage, and the recorded confession regarding the forged trust withdrawal. The evidence is completely irrefutable. We are currently preparing federal warrants for your arrest." The federal agent looked down at my brother, who was now weeping silently, his tears dripping onto the forged documents he had used to steal my daughter's future. "The charges are wire fraud, identity theft, and the federal embezzlement of a minor's trust," Agent Harris concluded. "The penalty for these crimes carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary." The trap was entirely closed. There was nowhere left for them to run. They had spent their entire lives manipulating the people around them, relying on lies and fake tears to escape consequence. But federal investigators do not care about fake tears. They only care about paper trails. And the paper trail I had meticulously uncovered was a straight line to their absolute destruction. I sat silently at the head of the table watching the color completely drain from my brother's face as the reality of a 10-year prison sentence finally crashed down upon him. I let the crushing silence stretch for a full minute, allowing the sheer gravity of the moment to anchor itself in their minds. Malik was trembling so violently his knees knocked loudly against the heavy wooden pedestal of the conference table. My mother was weeping into her manicured hands, her carefully styled hair falling in messy, chaotic strands across her face. My father looked like he had aged 20 years, in 20 seconds, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked gasps. Chloe was practically pressing herself against the soundproof glass wall, trying to physically distance herself from the sinking ship she had tied her life to. The two federal agents remained completely still, their presence a massive, terrifying weight in the room. I tapped my index finger against the smooth leather cover of the black binder. "I am not a monster," I said, my voice breaking the silence with the cold, clinical precision of a striking snake. "I am a forensic accountant. I believe in balancing the ledger. You stole $200,000 from my daughter. With 5 years of compounding interest and severe financial penalties for the emotional and legal distress you have caused, the total amount owed is substantially higher than the original theft. But I am willing to offer you a permanent settlement today, right here in this room." I raised my right hand, holding up a single finger. "I am giving you exactly 2 options," I continued. "Option A is a complete and total financial surrender. You will sign over every single asset you currently own directly to Obsidian Holdings. Malik, you will sign over the absolute deed to your commercial lots, the full ownership of your failing business entity, and the titles to your luxury vehicles. Mom and Dad, you will sign over the absolute deed to the colonial house. Furthermore, you will surrender the $40,000 Rolex, the Hermes bags, and all the diamond jewelry you are currently wearing. Every single penny of your liquid and physical assets will go toward repaying the money you stole from Aaliyah. You will walk out of this building with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your backs and the freedom to start over from scratch." I held up a second finger, my eyes locking onto my brother's terrified face. "Option B is much simpler." I close this binder. I stand up and I walk out of this room. Special Agent Harris and Special Agent Vance will step forward and place Brenda and Malik Hayes under immediate federal arrest. You will be escorted out of this corporate building in handcuffs, in full view of the public and my colleagues. You will be formally indicted for wire fraud, identity theft, and the federal embezzlement of a minor's trust. The mandatory minimum sentence for these combined federal charges is 10 to 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary. You will lose the assets anyway to pay for your criminal defense lawyers, and you will spend the best years of your lives rotting in a concrete cell. I folded my hands back over the binder. "You have exactly 2 minutes to make your choice," I announced. "Asset forfeiture or federal prison. Choose right now." Malik let out a guttural, agonizing sob. He fell entirely to his knees, crawling across the expensive carpet toward my chair. "Maya, please," he begged, his hands grasping blindly at the air as if he were drowning. "I am your brother. I cannot go to prison. I would not survive a week in there. I will give you the business. I will give you the cars. Just please do not let them take me away." My father stood up, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. He raised his wooden cane and slammed it down onto the mahogany table, causing my mother to shriek in terror. "You stupid, arrogant boy," my father roared, spitting the words at Malik. "You ruined us. You threw away everything I worked my entire life for because you wanted to play the big-shot real estate developer. And you," he turned his furious, burning gaze to my mother, "you enabled him. You forged a federal document. You signed away our home for this idiot. You are a criminal, Brenda. My mother shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. I did it for the family. Calvin, she wailed, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast room. I wanted him to be successful. We were supposed to be the perfect family. We had an image to maintain in the community. You were never a perfect family. I interrupted, my voice slicing effortlessly through their pathetic arguments. You were a parasite disguised as a family. You fed on my guilt, you fed on my father's money, and eventually, you tried to feed on my daughter's future. The clock is ticking. You have 1 minute left. Chloe suddenly pushed herself away from the glass wall. I am not a part of this, she shouted, her voice frantic and breathless. I did not forge that document. I did not know the money was stolen from a child. I am leaving. I am calling my divorce lawyer right now. She grabbed her designer coat and ran for the heavy double doors. Agent Harris stepped slightly to the side, allowing her to flee the room. She did not look back at Malik even once. Her departure was the final nail in the coffin of Malik's completely shattered ego. Malik collapsed onto the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Mom, please sign it, he sobbed, looking up at the woman who had ruined him with her toxic coddling. I cannot go to jail. Please sign the house over. My father grabbed my mother by the arm, his grip bruising and tight. Sign the papers, Brenda, he hissed. You made this mess. You sign away the house right now, or I swear to God I will testify against you in federal court. I reached into the binder and pulled out the thick stack of asset transfer agreements. I laid them out in a perfect row across the polished wood. I placed a heavy gold pen next to the documents. 30 seconds, I announced. Malik dragged himself up from the floor. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the heavy pen. He leaned over the table, sobbing loudly as he signed his name on the transfer of his commercial properties. He signed over the titles to his cars. He signed away his entire fake empire. Then he pushed the pen toward my mother. She stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. Signing that paper meant admitting she was a total failure. It meant losing the massive colonial house she used to impress her country club friends. It meant she would have to face the world as a broke, disgraced woman. But the alternative was a cold prison cell. With a violently trembling hand, she picked up the pen. She pressed the tip to the paper and slowly, painfully signed away her home. Now the watch, Malik, I instructed, and Mom the jewelry. Malik hastily unclasped the heavy gold Rolex and slid it across the table. My mother reached up to her neck, her fingers fumbling blindly with the clasp of her expensive pearl necklace. She took it off and placed it next to the watch. She slid her massive diamond rings off her fingers, placing them in a small, glittering pile. I carefully gathered the signed documents, inspecting each signature to ensure it was completely legally binding. The total deconstruction was finished. The heavy silence that followed the scratching of the pen against the paper was suffocating. Malik stared blankly at the mahogany table, his chest heaving as he tried to process the absolute totality of his ruin. My mother sat frozen, her hands gripping the edges of her chair, as if it were the only thing keeping her from plummeting into an abyss. She looked at the small pile of jewelry sitting next to the signed documents. Her status, her wealth, her entire identity was sitting in that pile. My father leaned heavily on his cane, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged and shallow. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. Agent Harris stepped forward, picking up the signed transfer agreements and sliding them into a secure federal folder. The documents are legally executed, he confirmed, his voice cutting through the heavy air. Obsidian Holdings is now the sole proprietor of all listed assets. Brenda and Malik Hayes, you are formally ordered to vacate the residential property no later than noon on Friday. Failure to comply will result in immediate physical eviction by federal marshals. Furthermore, while we are temporarily suspending the arrest warrants pending a full review of these asset transfers, you remain under active federal investigation. Do not attempt to leave the state. The agents turned and walked out of the boardroom, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind them with a final, definitive click. I remained seated at the head of the table, my hands folded neatly over the black binder. I looked at the three broken people sitting in front of me. I did not feel a shred of pity or regret. I only felt the clean, cold satisfaction of a balanced ledger. Malik slowly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot and swollen from crying. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and absolute desperation. "Maya, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I signed everything. You have the business, you have the cars, you have the house. But what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to live? I have nothing. I am bankrupt. My wife just left me. I am going to be investigated by the FBI. I am your brother Maya. You cannot just leave me like this. You have to help me start over." I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of any empathy. "I am not a charity, Malik," I replied softly. "I am a forensic accountant. I simply corrected a mathematical error you made 5 years ago. You stole $200,000 from my daughter to fund a fake empire. I just reclaimed the principal with interest. As for how you are supposed to live, that is entirely your problem. Perhaps you can get a job. I hear manual labor builds character." My mother suddenly lunged forward, her hands slamming onto the table. "You are a monster!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ragged. "You planned this. You trapped us. You manipulated your own family into giving up everything we own. You are a cold, heartless monster, Maya." I stood up from my chair, picking up the black binder. "I am exactly what you made me, Mom," I said, looking directly into her frantic eyes. "You taught me that family is conditional. You taught me that money is more important than loyalty. And you taught me that when someone you love is lying in a hospital bed bleeding and grieving, the appropriate response is to steal their child's future and go on vacation." I walked around the edge of the table, stopping right next to Malik's chair. I leaned down until my face was only inches from his ear. "Hawaii was nice, wasn't it?" I whispered. Malik flinched as if I had physically struck him. He buried his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom. I did not look back. I did not need to. They were completely, utterly ruined. The next few days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and corporate transfers. Richard was thrilled with the acquisition, praising my ruthless efficiency. The commercial lots were quickly sold to a legitimate development firm, netting a massive profit for Obsidian Holdings. The luxury vehicles were auctioned off, and the proceeds were deposited directly into Aaliyah's restored trust fund. On Friday morning, I drove my SUV to the affluent suburb where my parents' colonial house sat. I parked across the street under the shade of a large oak tree and watched the final act of their destruction unfold. A cheap, rusted moving truck was backed into the sweeping circular driveway. Malik was carrying a flimsy cardboard box out the front door, struggling under its weight. He looked exhausted, his posture completely defeated. He loaded the box into the back of the truck, his movements slow and agonizing. My father followed him, leaning heavily on his cane, carrying a small desk lamp. They were moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, a neighborhood my mother had spent her entire life looking down upon. I watched my mother walk out onto the porch. She was wearing a faded tracksuit, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the manicured lawn, the brick facade, the life she had built, on a foundation of lies and theft. She was saying goodbye to the only thing she had ever truly loved. I did not feel the need to roll down my window or honk the horn. I did not need to gloat. The revenge was complete. The debt was paid in full. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them behind in the wreckage of their own making. I drove back to my peaceful condo, the sanctuary I had built for myself and my daughter. When I walked through the front door, Aaliyah came running down the hallway, her face lighting up with a bright, innocent smile. "Mommy, you are home," she cheered, throwing her arms around my legs. I crouched down and hugged her tightly, burying my face in her soft curls. "I am home, baby," I whispered. "I am right here." I had secured her future. I had protected her from the toxic poison of my bloodline. I had burned down the rotten bridge that connected me to my abusers, and I had built an impenetrable fortress in its place. Family is not determined by DNA. It is determined by loyalty, respect, and love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to completely walk away from the people who share your last name. You have to be willing to burn down the toxic roots so the healthy branches can finally grow. My name is Maya. I survived the darkest day of my life and I built an empire from the ashes. I learned that true power does not come from screaming or crying. True power comes from absolute cold calculation and the unyielding determination to protect the people who actually matter. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving betrayal and taking back your power. Remember, your story is still being written and you are the only one holding the pen. The dust settled over the next several months, but the impact of that morning in the boardroom permanently reshaped the landscape of my life. I did not just walk away from my toxic family, I systematically dismantled the financial infrastructure that allowed them to abuse me. The legal team at Obsidian Holdings moved with lethal efficiency. The commercial lots Malik had banked his entire ego on were liquidated within a week. The proceeds covered the initial debt, and the remaining balance was aggressively applied to the $200,000 he stole from my daughter. The luxury vehicles were seized. They were auctioned off immediately. The proceeds from the $40,000 Rolex and the Hermes bags were placed directly into an educational trust for Aaliyah. Every single penny was tracked, accounted for, and restored. Chloe did not escape the wreckage. She thought divorcing Malik would save her reputation, but the state attorney general did not care about her marital status. The financial files I handed over at the charity gala launched a full-scale criminal investigation. Chloe was formally indicted for state-level embezzlement and charity fraud. Her father, the respected judge, publicly completely severed ties with her today. He wanted to protect his own political career. She was forced to surrender her passport, and her assets were frozen. The woman who once stood in my pristine living room and told me to move into a basement to help the family was now facing the very real prospect of a state prison sentence. She had absolutely no one left to manipulate. 3 weeks after the boardroom meeting, the final eviction notice for my parents' colonial house took effect. I did not plan to go watch them leave, but something deep inside me needed the visual confirmation that the nightmare was truly over. I drove my SUV to the affluent suburb and parked down the street completely hidden behind the tinted windows. The autumn leaves were falling, covering the manicured lawn my mother used to obsess over. A cheap rented moving truck sat in the driveway. It was a stark, humiliating contrast to the luxury vehicles that usually occupied that space. I watched Malik walk out of the front door carrying a stack of broken-down cardboard boxes. He looked like a completely different person. The arrogance that used to radiate from him was entirely gone, replaced by exhausting shame. He loaded the boxes into the back of the truck, his shoulders slumped. My father emerged next, leaning heavily on his cane, carrying a few personal items. He did not look at his son. The blame and resentment between them was a toxic cloud they would have to breathe for the rest of their lives. They were moving into a cramped, subsidized apartment on the worst side of town. My mother was the last to walk out. She stood on the front porch wearing a faded sweater, looking at the brick facade of the house she had sacrificed her soul to keep. She had chosen a fake image over her own daughter. She had chosen stolen money over her granddaughter. Now the image was shattered, and the money was gone. She had nothing left but the crushing reality of her own choices. I did not roll down the window to gloat. I did not honk the horn. I simply put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them behind in the ruins of their own making. When I returned to my condo, the air felt lighter. The suffocating pressure that had haunted me since childhood vanished. I walked into the living room and found Aaliyah sitting on the rug playing with her building blocks. She looked up at me, her bright eyes full of innocent joy. "Mommy!" she called out, running over to hug my legs. I picked her up, holding her tightly against my chest. Later that evening, after I tucked her into bed, she asked me a question that broke my heart and healed it all at once. "Are Grandma and Uncle Malik coming back?" she asked softly, pulling her blanket up to her chin. I sat on the edge of her small bed, smoothing her natural curls. "No, baby," I told her, my voice steady and calm. "They are not coming back. Sometimes people who are supposed to love us do not know how to be safe, and it is my job to make sure you are always safe." Aaliyah simply nodded, accepting the truth with the pure wisdom only a child possesses. That night I sat alone on my balcony looking out over the glowing city skyline. I thought about the journey that brought me to this moment. For years I had tried to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be the perfect daughter, the supportive sister, the quiet scapegoat. But the truth is, you cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. You cannot reason with people who benefit from your silence. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary. It is supposed to be the place where you are safe from the cruelty of the world. But when your family is the source of that cruelty, you have a profound obligation to yourself to walk away. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to abuse you. Blood does not give anyone the right to steal your peace or your future. Family is not biology. Family is who holds your hand in the dark. Family is who stands by you when you are broken and helps you rebuild. I had to cut out the toxic roots of my past so the healthy branches of my future could finally grow. I had to become the villain in their story so I could finally be the hero in my daughter's life. Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives to save yourself? Share your story below today. The story we just witnessed teaches us a profound and difficult truth about human relationships. We are often conditioned from childhood to believe that family is an unbreakable bond dictated entirely by blood. We are told to forgive unconditionally and to constantly sacrifice our own well-being for the sake of biological ties. However, this narrative can quickly become a dangerous trap. The most vital lesson learned from this ordeal is that sharing DNA with someone does not give them a free pass to manipulate, steal from, or destroy you. Toxic behavior does not suddenly become acceptable just because it comes from a parent or a sibling. Maya survived because she recognized that her true obligation was not to the people who abandoned her, but to her daughter and to her own peace of mind. She showed us that setting absolute boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Walking away from toxic family members requires immense courage because it means mourning the family you deserved but never actually had. But when you stop trying to fix people who are committed to using you, you finally reclaim your power. You stop being a victim of their chaos and become the architect of your own sanctuary. Healing begins the exact moment you accept that you have the right to curate the people in your life based on their character and their actions rather than their genetic proximity to you. Letting go of toxic roots is the only way to ensure your own branches have the space to grow strong and healthy. It is time to evaluate the relationships that constantly drain your spirit and finally take back control of your narrative. Please share your own experiences with setting family boundaries in the comments below.